Welcome, dear subscribers and curious listeners of my channel. Today, we return once again to the pages of Order of the Phoenix and take a closer look at one of the most striking, but yet often underrated, elements of this chapter in magical history: Dumbledore's army. Yet sadly, the film version left out many of the most powerful details. In this video, I've gathered key elements that were completely cut from the movie adaptation, and that might just change how you view these events altogether. Enjoy watching. Number 1. How did the Dumbledore's army know when to meet? In the film, there's a logical question. How did everyone know when and where to meet next? Did Harry just run through the halls shouting, "Meeting at 7"? It was much more elegant than that. Once the Dumbledore's army was formed, Hermione created a clever communication system. Each member received a fake galleon coin that she had enchanted with a protean charm, the same type of magic the Death Eaters used for their dark marks. When she changed the meeting time on her coin, the others would automatically change as well. And yes, you heard right. This is advanced magic taught only at NEWT level. Once again, Hermione proved she's not just clever, she's brilliant. Number 2, the sign-up sheet. In the film, the sign-up sheet seems like a casual piece of parchment, just a way to keep track. But Hermione never does anything casually. In the book, she enchanted the list with a curse, turning it into a magical trap. If anyone betrayed the group, their name on the list would activate a jinx. It wasn't just a roster, it was a security system. That's why Marietta Edgecombe, not Cho Chang as the film implies, paid the price for betrayal. Her face broke out in painful pustules, spelling out the word sneak. In the movie, no such magical consequence appears, and that's a real loss. Number 3, the Hogshead. The first meeting of Dumbledore's army didn't happen in some cozy, hidden room. It was held in the shady Hogshead pub, chosen by Hermione specifically because it was the kind of place where no one would be eavesdropping. But the film omits crucial details. One of the shady figures sitting nearby, disguised as an old witch, was Mundungus Fletcher, who later leaked the info to the Order. And the barman? None other than Aberforth Dumbledore, Albus's brother. He became the first adult to learn of the group's existence. The movie stripped this scene of its suspense, mystery, and the sense of danger that surrounded the original meeting. Number 4, the Room of Requirement. The legendary Room of Requirement became the very heart of the Dumbledore's army's training. In the movie, Neville stumbles upon it by chance, which is sweet but underwhelming. In the book, however, Harry learned about the room from Dobby the house elf, who knew of its magic and told Harry how to summon it. The very fact that Dobby once again played a key role adds real weight to his contribution, but in the film, he's ignored once more, his role erased. Number 5, Fred and George's exit. Fred and George didn't just leave Hogwarts in style, they blew the system sky high. The film gives us a brief moment of fireworks, but in the book, the chaos stretched on for weeks. Swamps filled the corridors, smoke and stench bombs filled the air, magical fireworks exploded non-stop, and most importantly, the whole school rebelled. Even Peeves joined in after the twins asked him to give her Umbridge hell from us. Hogwarts transformed into a battlefield of resistance and chaos. The movie reduced it to a 3-minute montage. Number 6, the name. The name Dumbledore's army wasn't just a joke, it was a jab at the Ministry itself. Ginny Weasley suggested the name to provoke Cornelius Fudge. Remember, the paranoid minister was convinced that Dumbledore was secretly training student soldiers to overthrow the government. Ironically, the very name became damning evidence. When the sign-up list was discovered, it confirmed Fudge's worst fears. That piece of parchment became a political weapon and led to Dumbledore's attempted arrest. One name, one bold idea, changed everything. Number 7. Quidditch and the Dumbledore's army. Quidditch didn't vanish in Order of the Phoenix. The film just erased it. But in the book, it's part of the heartbeat of Hogwarts. After Umbridge bans Harry from playing, it's Ginny Weasley who steps in as Seeker. And she doesn't just fill the spot, she owns it. Fast, sharp, fearless. She's pretty good. Harry admits, watching her soar. It's more than a game. It's a quiet message. She's not just Ron's sister or a background character. She's a fighter. She belongs in the air and in the resistance. Ron, too, gets his chance. As keeper, he battles nerves, self-doubt, and the jeers of Slytherins. His struggles are messy and real, but when he wins a game, the common room explodes. The Dumbledore's army members cheer louder than anyone. These matches build more than points. They build trust, confidence, camaraderie. Outside the room of requirement, they learn to rely on each other under pressure, and on the field, as in battle, they begin to believe they can win. Number 8. Umbridge's decrees. Dolores Umbridge didn't just bring rules, she brought a regime. In the film, we see her hang a few plaques and ban some clubs, but in the book, her power grows like a shadow. The ministry begins issuing educational decrees, one after another. By decree number 24, student organizations are outlawed unless approved by Umbridge herself. Then come curfews, book restrictions, interrogations. She even limits bathroom use, forcing students to ask permission for the most basic needs. Hogwarts stops feeling like a school. It becomes a cage. Each decree is designed to kill independence, and Umbridge watches for disobedience like a hawk. She bans the Quibbler, confiscates brooms, tells teachers what they can and cannot say. Even Professor McGonagall, proud and iron-willed, is warned. I do not hold with your methods, Dolores, nor do I agree with your point of view, but you have the power now. Students whisper in hallways. Peeves ramps up his chaos. And for every cracked joke, another decree follows. That's why Dumbledore's army isn't just a club, it's a necessity. It's where they learn the spells they're forbidden to use, where they speak freely, plan, hope. In a school ruled by silence, the Dumbledore's army becomes a voice, a choice, a spark. The more Umbridge tightens her grip, the more her students slip through it, armed not with weapons, but with knowledge, courage, and the refusal to bow. Number 9. Snowfall in the Room of Requirement. The Room of Requirement was more than a secret classroom. It was a refuge, and during the Christmas season it became something magical. In the book, Dobby decorates the room for one of the final meetings of the year. He doesn't hold back. Golden baubles shaped like Harry's face. Tinsel strung across the ceiling, and then snow, soft, glistening snow falling gently from above, melting before it touched the floor. It's absurd, ridiculous, and completely perfect. The students laugh. They tease Harry about the ornaments. But in that moment they are not rebels, not fighters, not targets of Umbridge's surveillance. They are just teenagers, surrounded by warmth, light, and the quiet hush of enchanted snow. Harry looked around at the warm, flickering light, the laughing faces, the snowy ceiling, and for the first time in days he felt almost at peace. That line says it all. For once, they could breathe. The film never shows this. No snow, no Dobby, no laughter under enchanted icicles. But in the book, that night matters. It reminds them why they fight. Not for glory, not even for Dumbledore, but for moments like this, where friendship and safety still exist, where the world for just 1 hour feels whole again. Number 10. Trelawney's dismissal. Professor Trelawney was never taken seriously, not by the students, not by most teachers, not even by readers, until that moment on the Hogwarts grounds when everything changed. In the Order of the Phoenix book, Umbridge fires her, in front of everyone. Trelawney stumbles out of the castle, shaking, crying, her luggage clattering behind her. The students watch in silence. Even those who doubted her feel the injustice. She isn't just being dismissed, she's being humiliated. Then Dumbledore appears, calm, certain, furious beneath the surface. He doesn't argue with Umbridge, he doesn't shout. He simply says, "You may not remove her from this castle." And just like that, he reclaims a piece of Hogwarts that Umbridge tried to destroy. He turns to Sybil, lays a hand on her shoulder, and says, "You are not going to be banished from the castle grounds. That is not going to happen." For the first time, Trelawney is seen, respected, protected. This moment isn't about prophecy, it's about power. And who has the right to use it? For Dumbledore's army, it's a turning point. They realize Umbridge isn't just enforcing rules, she's erasing people. Good people, harmless people. She doesn't care about education or truth. She wants control. And Dumbledore's quiet defiance plants a seed in their hearts. If he can stand up for someone so powerless, so can they. The film left it out. No courtyard, no suitcases, no trembling Sybil. But the book made it unforgettable. In that single scene, students saw the difference between cruelty and courage, and they chose their side, not with speeches or spells, just with eyes opened and a heart quietly breaking for a woman who, for once, was not invisible. Number 11. Neville Longbottom's growth. Neville Longbottom was never meant to be just comic relief. In the films, he stumbles, forgets passwords, and speaks with a nervous stammer. But the book tells a different story. Inside Dumbledore's army, Neville starts to change. He's the one who stays after training to practice spells long after everyone else has left. He's the one who keeps going even when it hurts. In one scene, he tries Stupefy so hard, he knocks himself unconscious. It's funny, yes, but also heartbreaking. He's trying, desperately. Harry sees it. Neville had improved beyond all recognition. That's what the book says. Hermione agrees. Even Ron, who often mocks, starts nodding in approval. For the first time, Neville isn't the boy who breaks things or gets left behind. He's mastering defensive spells, Protego, Impedimenta, Expelliarmus, and he's doing it with raw determination, not talent. What he lacks in natural skill, he replaces with fierce willpower. And then there's his reason. Neville's parents, Alice and Frank Longbottom, were tortured into madness by Bellatrix Lestrange. He visits them in St. Mungo's. They don't recognize him. He never talks about it. But that pain fuels him. He doesn't want revenge. He wants to be strong enough so it never happens again. In Dumbledore's army, he finds a place where he isn't pitied. He's respected. He belongs. The film gives Neville his heroic moment in the final battle. But the book gives him the journey. From clumsy to courageous, from overlooked to indispensable, Dumbledore's army didn't just prepare him for war, it taught him who he was, and in doing so it gave us one of the bravest characters in the entire series. Number 12, Journey to the Ministry of Magic. In the film, the journey from Hogwarts to the Ministry of Magic happens in a flash. One moment, Harry says they need to go. The next, they're flying over London. It's cinematic, yes, but in the book, that journey is heavy, dangerous, and deeply symbolic. It begins with fear. Harry doesn't even know how to get there. Then Luna Lovegood, calm and steady, suggests they fly on Thestrals, those eerie, skeletal creatures with leathery wings, creatures that only appear to those who have seen death. Harry can see them. So can Neville, Luna, and later Ginny. Their ability to ride Thestrals is a quiet, haunting badge of pain. They're very gentle, really, Luna says, stroking one of the beasts. It's the kind of line that sounds innocent, until you realize what it means. Every child in that group has faced death, Cedric, parents, battles, and now they're about to risk everything again just for the hope that Sirius is still alive. The flight isn't glorious. It's cold, confusing, long. Harry had the impression that they were flying through layers of cold mist. No music, no smooth sweeping shots, just 6 teenagers clinging to invisible creatures in the dark, their robes whipping in the wind, stomachs lurching every time the Thestrals dipped or twisted. None of them knew what was waiting at the ministry, only that Harry believed Sirius was in danger, and they trusted him enough to follow. This journey is where they grow up, not in the duel, not in the prophecy room, but right here between the castle and the chaos, choosing to leave safety, to trust each other, to face the unknown with wands drawn and hearts pounding. The film made it a shortcut. The book made it a rite of passage. Number 13, Why Cho told about the Dumbledore's army. In the Order of the Phoenix film, Cho Chang is shown as the one who betrays Dumbledore's army. She's the reason Umbridge finds the Room of Requirement. It's fast, simple, and cruel. One scene, and suddenly Cho becomes the traitor. But in the book, the truth is far more painful and human. Cho didn't say anything. It was her friend, Marietta Edgecombe, who revealed the Dumbledore's army to Umbridge. and Marietta didn't even want to come to the meeting in the first place. Marietta was dragged along by Cho, who simply wanted her friend to be included, but Marietta was the daughter of a ministry employee. She was scared, pressured, and eventually she gave in. But Hermione had planned ahead. The sign-up list had been hexed. The moment Marietta spoke to Umbridge, boils formed across her face, spelling out a single damning word, sneak. It didn't fade, it didn't wash off. It marked her permanently as a warning and a curse. Cho wasn't just another student. She was grieving. Cedric Diggory, the boy she loved, had been murdered months before. Her world had collapsed, and now she was trying to move forward by connecting with Harry, by fighting back. But when Marietta was exposed and humiliated, Cho stood torn. She didn't approve of the betrayal, but she couldn't abandon her friend either. Harry didn't understand. He pulled away. Their fragile bond cracked and fell apart. J.K. Rowling wrote Cho as a girl struggling between loyalty and love, grief and guilt. The film stripped that away. In the book, when Marietta's face is revealed, it says, "The word sneak glistened still more brightly on her blotchy cheek." That wasn't Cho's doing. It was fear, misplaced trust, and a heartbreaking chain of events. Reducing it to a single act of betrayal does a deep injustice, not only to Cho Chang, but to the entire emotional truth of her story. Number 14. Who was the best in the Dumbledore's army? The room of requirement glowed with flickering torchlight as the students gathered, hearts pounding, wands trembling slightly in excited hands. For many, this was their first true taste of rebellion, of empowerment. Dumbledore's army, or the Dumbledore's army, as it came to be fondly known, wasn't just a club, it was a movement, a declaration, an act of resistance born from necessity. And while Harry Potter led it, and Hermione Granger meticulously organized it, the question remains, who among them was truly the best? Harry, of course, had the most experience with dark magic and dangerous creatures. His survival against Voldemort marked him as extraordinary. But the Dumbledore's army was never just about Harry. It was about preparing everyone, giving each student the tools to stand on their own. And this is where things got interesting, because within that diverse, impassioned group, several individuals began to rise, revealing talents that had long been overshadowed in the traditional structure of Hogwarts. Ginny Weasley is one of the first names that must be mentioned. Her reputation had already started to build following her 5th year, but in the Dumbledore's army she flourished. Confident, focused, and quick-witted, she displayed a natural gift for dueling. Her use of the disarming charm, Expelliarmus, was so sharp that Harry took notice during early sessions. In Order of the Phoenix, he observes that Ginny's Expelliarmus was so good it knocked Zacharias Smith halfway across the room. This wasn't just power, it was control, technique, and intention. Ginny's strength didn't come from being the youngest Weasley or the sister of famed Gryffindor heroes. It came from resilience. Her encounter with Tom Riddle in the Chamber of Secrets left her scarred, but it also built an inner fortitude. In the Dumbledore's army, she wasn't just participating. She was asserting her right to fight back, on her own terms. Her Bat-Bogey Hex was already the stuff of legend, and in each session she grew stronger, less like a student and more like a soldier in training. Then there was Anthony Goldstein, a Ravenclaw prefect. Anthony wasn't as flashy as some, but he had a methodical, almost surgical precision with his spells. He treated the Dumbledore's army sessions like academic seminars at first, often taking meticulous notes and asking detailed questions about the structure of spells. But it didn't take long for him to move beyond theory. His shield charm was particularly refined, and during the session where they practiced counter-curses, Anthony was one of the few able to deflect a curse mid-air and return a stunner in the same breath. His talent might have gone unnoticed if not for the balance he brought to the group. While others fought with emotion, Anthony brought strategy. He was the one who suggested practicing in pairs with mixed houses, an idea Hermione praised as smart and unifying. His role wasn't loud, but it was essential. When the Dumbledore's army moved into more advanced work like Patronus training, Anthony was among the first to succeed. His Patronus, a raven, soared with clarity, a perfect match for his house, and a testament to his sharp intellect. Blaise Zabini, though not traditionally portrayed as a member of the Dumbledore's army, is occasionally cited in fan interpretations and extended lore as having a kind of reluctant, shadowed respect for those who resisted Umbridge. While he never officially joined, the contrast is worth noting, because his absence only underscored the courage of those who stepped up. Students like Luna Lovegood, Ernie Macmillan and Susan Bones weren't necessarily the top of their class, but in Dumbledore's army they found their power. That in itself is telling. In the Dumbledore's army, identity was forged not by background or reputation, but by choice. But one name towers above the rest, not because he started strong, but because of how far he came: Neville Longbottom. At the beginning of their 5th year, few would have bet on Neville to stand out in any field involving magic. Known for his forgetfulness and clumsiness, he was more often the subject of sympathy than admiration. Yet in Dumbledore's army, he underwent one of the most remarkable transformations Hogwarts ever witnessed. Neville's journey is not just inspirational, it's deeply emotional. Every spell he cast, every step he took toward improvement was powered by a personal fire. The memory of his parents, tortured into madness by Bellatrix Lestrange and other Death Eaters. He didn't talk about it much, but everyone in the Dumbledore's army knew. That pain, that quiet sorrow, it didn't crush him, it built him. During a particularly intense practice session, when Harry paired the students randomly to duel, Neville managed to disarm both Lavender Brown and Justin Finch Fletchley, one after the other. The room went quiet, and Neville stood blinking, almost surprised by himself. But Harry wasn't surprised. "You're doing really well, Neville," the book reads. "You've just earned yourself a chocolate frog." It's a simple line, but it marks a turning point. From then on, Neville practiced harder than anyone. He stayed after others had gone, working on his stunning spells until sweat soaked through his robes. His impedimenta curse grew strong enough to stop a charging Seamus Finnegan mid-run. When the group began learning how to cast full-bodied Patronuses, Neville didn't succeed immediately, but he didn't give up either. His tenacity was unshakable. And when the battle at the Department of Mysteries came, Neville fought alongside Harry, Ron, Hermione, Luna, and Ginny. His nose was broken, his wand snapped, but still he stood. Still he fought. "We're not giving up," he cried out, as the battle raged around them. This was more than bravery, it was conviction, the kind that doesn't falter when the pain hits, the kind that keeps going when everyone else might have run. That's what made Neville the best. Not natural talent, not top marks, not even momentary brilliance, but growth and heart, and the ability to inspire, even in the darkest moments. Number 15. Umbridge and the Truth Serum. Of all the moments that exposed the twisted heart of Dolores Umbridge, few were as chilling as the one hidden deep in the pages of Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, a moment the film adaptation barely brushed upon: the attempted use of Veritaserum on Harry Potter. In the darkened shadows of her obsession with control and her bitter hatred of dissent, Umbridge dared to employ the most invasive magical means to extract truth from a child. This was not a simple disciplinary tactic. It was psychological warfare, sanctioned by fear and cloaked in the robes of authority. It began with a trap. Umbridge, paranoid and suspicious, intercepted a message Harry tried to send to Sirius Black. The scene was set in the headmistress's office, once Dumbledore's haven, now overtaken by kitschy cat plates and the suffocating scent of enforced obedience. Harry had tried to contact Sirius through the Flu network, seeking guidance and assurance, but he was caught, dragged before Umbridge, who had already sealed off most methods of communication within the school. Her demeanor was falsely sweet, her voice syrupy with menace. She claimed to want to know where Dumbledore's secret weapon was hidden, an expression that sent Harry's mind into overdrive. She assumed Dumbledore was building something dangerous, something real and tangible. What she didn't realize was that the weapon she feared was not steel or spellwork, it was unity. It was the spirit of rebellion quietly rising in the hearts of students. It was Dumbledore's army. When Harry refused to tell her anything, Umbridge unveiled her trump card, Veritaserum, the truth serum. Its very name evokes unease. "You are going to tell me the truth," she said, as Harry watched her pour a few drops into a glass of water. What sent dread into the reader's chest was not just the idea of a potion, but the idea of enforced vulnerability. Umbridge wasn't merely interested in punishment, she wanted submission of the mind. In the book, this scene is delivered with a heavy sense of looming danger. Rowling does not exaggerate, instead she builds tension through the oppressive certainty that Umbridge is unbound by decency. Professor Snape is summoned, and when he arrives, Umbridge demands another vial of Veritaserum. Snape's reply is carefully measured. "You used up my entire stock on Potter, as I told you back in your office. Unless you wish to poison him, and I assure you I would have no difficulty in brewing an antidote, I must ask you to wait for 3 days." There is a layered brilliance here. Snape is buying Harry time, subtly shielding him from a fate that in other hands would have torn open his secrets. Though Snape's role in the story is often cloaked in ambiguity, here his deflection serves a crucial purpose. By denying Umbridge a fresh supply of Veritaserum, he forces her hand. She turns to cruelty instead. With no potion to force the truth, she resorts to threats, suggesting she will use the Cruciatus curse. This is where the moral flaw falls away. A government official inside a school threatening to use an unforgivable curse on a child. Rowling shows us without flinching how power can rot when left unchecked. Harry remains defiant, and the reader feels his fear. Not because he is afraid of Umbridge, but because he is protecting something bigger than himself. The secret of Dumbledore's army is sacred. The room of requirement, the faces of his friends, Neville, Luna, Ginny, they are not just names to him, they are people who believe in something. He would rather endure pain than betray them. That is what makes this moment pivotal. It is not a battle of magic, it is a battle of will. It is here that Hermione Granger steps forward. Her intelligence is a known force throughout the series, but this is a moment of masterful improvisation. She pretends to crack under pressure, she gasps, she trembles, and then she claims to know where the weapon is hidden. For a breathless moment, the power shifts. Hermione, so often the logical one, suddenly becomes the actress, and she plays her part with frightening perfection. She insists that the weapon is in the Forbidden Forest, buried in a secret place only she and Harry know about. Umbridge, desperate and hungry for validation, swallows the bait. She drags Harry and Hermione into the woods, away from the safety of Hogwarts and towards something she cannot control. The irony is sharp. Umbridge, who fears chaos, is led into the heart of it. The Forbidden Forest is no place for weak hearts. It is home to centaurs, ancient and proud, whose disdain for human arrogance is legendary. Umbridge, who sees all magical creatures as beneath her, cannot resist trying to control even them. When they emerge, proud and fierce, she speaks to them as if they are children. She commands, she threatens, she tries to manipulate them with ministry authority, but they are not bound by her laws. In this turning point, justice is poetic. The very arrogance that led her to believe she could bend minds with Veritaserum is now her downfall. The centaurs take her. Her screams fade into the forest, and for the first time, the reader feels a sense of balance, not triumph, not revenge, just equilibrium. The predator has become the prey. But it is the scene before the forest, back in the office with the truth serum, that lingers in the reader's mind. What would have happened if Snape had complied? What would Umbridge have done if she had the potion? Would Harry have been able to resist? Would the names of the Dumbledore's army have spilled from his lips? There is an eerie silence in knowing that in another version of the story, everything could have fallen apart. One drop of Veritaserum, one moment of hesitation. That is all it would have taken. Harry could have betrayed everything he was fighting for, not because he chose to, but because his mind was stolen from him. This is what makes Umbridge such a terrifying figure. Voldemort kills, but Umbridge erases. She deletes autonomy and replaces it with obedience. Number 16. Help from Peeves. For most of the Harry Potter series, Peeves the Poltergeist has been a symbol of unchecked chaos, a mischief maker of the highest order whose loyalties were to no one but his own amusement. Students feared him, professors dreaded him, and caretakers like Argus Filch nearly lost their minds trying to contain him. And yet, in a strange twist of poetic justice, it was this very agent of disorder who became an unlikely hero in one of Hogwarts' darkest chapters, when Dolores Umbridge seized control. Peeves had long haunted the corridors of Hogwarts with his gleeful pranks and merciless taunting. He was the kind of spirit who would unscrew chandeliers for fun and drop water balloons on unsuspecting heads. Yet, beneath the laughter and trouble, Peeves embodied something far more important. He was the chaotic soul of the castle, untouched by rules, unaffected by the rise and fall of headmasters, and utterly uncontrollable. No one could bridle him, not even Dumbledore, who tolerated him with a grim patience. But when Umbridge arrived, things changed. The castle's spirit stirred, and Peeves, for once, chose a side. It began slowly, subtly. At first, Peeves was his usual self, ignoring Umbridge the way he ignored everyone. But as her power grew and her cruelty deepened, something shifted. Hogwarts itself seemed to rebel against her, and Peeves was the spearhead of this silent revolution. When Umbridge's regime turned from mere inconvenience into full-blown tyranny, complete with corporal punishment, censorship, and authoritarian surveillance, Peeves reacted not with indifference, but with fire. The tipping point came after the legendary escape of Fred and George Weasley in Chapter 29, Career Advice. Their flight from the castle was more than just a prank. It was a rebellion. As fireworks exploded across the ceiling and swamp gas filled the corridors, the twins delivered their parting shot at Umbridge's rule. And it was in this chaos, as Filch stumbled and Umbridge screamed, that Peeves found his true calling, not as a nuisance, but as a resistor. What followed was something extraordinary. J.K. Rowling writes, Peeves, who had never taken orders from a student before, took Fred's parting words to heart. He saluted the twins and launched himself into a wild campaign of sabotage that even the teachers secretly applauded. In that moment, the ungovernable poltergeist became a freedom fighter, a symbol of resistance that no educational decree could silence. The salute, simple, silent, and soaked in meaning, marked a shift not only in Peeves's narrative role, but in the tone of the book itself. Fred's words were brief but powerful. Give her hell from us, Peeves. And Peeves, in one of the most emotionally charged and symbolic moments in the entire series, actually saluted. This moment, easy to miss in a fast-paced chapter, was loaded with defiance. A salute from Peeves meant that even chaos had drawn a line. It was a nod to camaraderie, to shared goals, to brotherhood in the face of oppression. In that one motion, Peeves wasn't just agreeing to make mischief, he was declaring allegiance. From that day on, Peeves operated like a one-ghost revolution. He tore up carpets, unscrewed chandeliers, smashed vases, and waged a guerrilla campaign against Umbridge's bureaucratic reign. Filch, Umbridge's most zealous enforcer, could only fume as he failed again and again to contain the mayhem. What made Peeves so effective was precisely what had always made him so difficult: his immunity to authority, his disinterest in consequences, and his ability to navigate the castle like a phantom breeze. There is deep irony in the fact that Peeves, who had never been bound by school rules, became the most potent answer to an overabundance of them. Umbridge tried to codify every minute of student life with her decrees, covering walls with official proclamations. And yet, no decree could command a spirit, no ink on parchment could tether a ghost. Peeves was the loophole in her logic, the flaw in her system. He was the embodiment of the very thing she feared most: anarchy with purpose. While students were beaten down by her quills and detentions, and professors walked a fine line between passive resistance and self-preservation, Peeves enjoyed a freedom that allowed him to become their vicarious voice. He could mock Umbridge to her face, trash her office, humiliate her in front of the inquisitorial squad, and he did so gleefully. His actions were not born from kindness or moral clarity, but they were nonetheless essential. In the darkest days, Peeves made people laugh again. What's more, even the staff found ways to look the other way. Minerva McGonagall, who had once reprimanded Peeves with stern Scottish discipline, now seemed content to ignore his more destructive escapades. There's an unspoken understanding in the text. Peeves was, for the first time, useful. He was not a tool, not a pawn, but a presence too powerful to bridle and too necessary to deny. In a school strangled by rules, he became the breath of freedom. This layer of subtext, how even Hogwarts' most unruly denizen found moral ground when true evil arrived, is lost in the film adaptations, which omitted Peeves entirely. His absence from the movies is perhaps one of their greatest oversights. Without him, the rebellion lacks its chaotic heart. It misses the message that sometimes even the least likely beings can become crucial in the fight against oppression. Peeves may have been the court jester, but during Umbridge's reign, he was also the sharpest thorn. Number 17, Symbols and Secrets of the Dumbledore's Army. It began not with a spell, but with silence. A silence that stretched between the corridors of Hogwarts, heavy and unnatural, like a fog that didn't belong. The Ministry's hand had reached into the heart of the castle, and Dolores Umbridge's pink smile masked a tightening grip on everything the school had once stood for. Rules were nailed to the walls. Whispers became dangerous. And in that silence, a group of students dared to create a sound, a whisper of resistance that would grow into a roar. Dumbledore's army was not born out of rebellion, it was born out of necessity. Harry Potter had seen what no one wanted to believe. Voldemort had returned. And yet, the Daily Prophet called him a liar, the Ministry branded him unstable. Teachers ignored the truth, and worst of all, defense against the dark arts had become a hollow shell, reduced to theory, stripped of practice, a mockery of defense itself. But teenagers, as the world often forgets, are not passive creatures. They feel injustice with the clarity of those who haven't yet been trained to ignore it. It was Hermione Granger who first voiced the thought. They needed to take matters into their own hands. She did not speak as a revolutionary, but as a student who had always believed in the power of knowledge. She knew that if they didn't learn to defend themselves, no one else would teach them. And so in the shadow of repression, she sowed the first seed of Dumbledore's army, a name whispered in jest but carried the weight of prophecy. The meeting in the Hog's Head was chaotic, full of clashing voices and uncertain eyes, but beneath the noise, something sacred was stirring. When Harry stood to speak, he didn't recite spells or promise victories. He spoke of Cedric Diggory, of choices, of fear and survival. If you want to know what a man's like, take a good look at how he treats his inferiors, not his equals, Hermione once quoted from Sirius Black. In that moment, Harry treated every person in the room as an equal. Not as the chosen one, not as the boy who lived, but as a student among students, ready to stand beside them. The room of requirement, with its quiet magic and adaptive walls, became their sanctuary. It opened not just its doors, but its heart. It transformed itself to reflect their needs, yes, but also their spirit. The cushions on the floor, the rows of books, the polished dueling space, every element answered their unspoken hope for safety, growth, and freedom. In that room, they were not under Umbridge's thumb. They were themselves, raw, hopeful, determined. Harry's lessons were not traditional. He did not lecture from a textbook. Instead, he recounted what he had lived, facing a basilisk with nothing but a sword and a phoenix summoning a Patronus under the weight of despair, dueling with Death Eaters in graveyards of the living. These were not just lessons in magic, they were lessons in resilience. Neville Longbottom, once mocked for his clumsiness, found a strength no one had seen before. Under Harry's guidance, he performed spells with growing confidence, his wand no longer trembling in his hand. There was a power in that unity, a kind of magic that went beyond incantations. Hermione, ever the organizer, created enchanted coins that served as summons. Their numbers and dates changed with the warmth of the enchantment, a detail so small, yet so intimate. It was more than cleverness, it was connection. A silent signal that whispered, "You are not alone." And in a world where truth had become dangerous, these tokens of trust were sacred. Every student brought something into that room. Ginny Weasley, fierce and sharp, struck with bat-bogey hexes that made even older students blink. Luna Lovegood, dreamlike but unshakable, brought with her a calm certainty that truth, no matter how odd, was worth protecting. Even Zachariah Smith, with his sneers and questions, represented something important, the right to doubt and still remain. But among them there was one symbol more subtle than all the others. A badge. A small enchanted pin created by Hermione, worn by coordinators like herself, Ginny, and a few others. It didn't glow. It didn't shout. But to those who knew, it meant something powerful. It meant leadership not imposed, but earned. A quiet reminder that leadership could belong to anyone, even students, even girls who others dismissed as know-it-alls. It was defiance in the form of fabric and thread. When Marietta Edgecombe betrayed them, when her fear overwhelmed her courage, it was not just a breach of secrecy. It was a fracture in trust. Hermione's enchantment on the parchment, which cursed Marietta with a face full of pimples, spelling sneak, was not cruel vengeance. It was a statement. That truth had a price, but so did betrayal. That actions mattered, that the words "I will not lie" were more than a classroom punishment. They were a code. The films, though vivid in their own right, often stripped this story to its bones. They showed the training, yes, the sparks of spells, the laughter during lessons, but they missed the soul. They missed the nights when the students returned to their beds with sore arms and brighter eyes. They missed the way Dean Thomas looked at Seamus after weeks of silence and finally said, "You were right to believe him." They missed how Colin Creevey, too young in some eyes, practiced with the fury of someone who had seen too much too soon. There is a moment in the book when Harry watches the members of the Dumbledore's army practicing the shield charm. The text reads, "Harry was pleased to see that most of them were making an effort, even if they were not all getting the results." That sentence carries the very heart of the group, not success, but effort. Not talent, but will. They were not the best. They were not the brightest. They were simply those who refused to do nothing. And then came the night at the Department of Mysteries, the final exam, though no teacher had assigned it. They were not ready. How could they be? But they went anyway. Not because they thought they'd win, but because they knew they couldn't stay behind. The battle in the Ministry's depths was chaotic and terrifying. Yet the members of Dumbledore's army stood shoulder to shoulder with Harry, not because he was their leader, but because he was their friend. Neville was injured. Ginny's ankle was broken. Luna was thrown against walls. But not one of them ran. What they faced there, the Death Eaters, the Veil, the death of Sirius, could have broken them. But the Dumbledore's army did not dissolve after that night. If anything, the bond was sealed. They had bled together, they had fought together, and they had learned that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. Dumbledore himself acknowledged it. In his office, after the battle, he told Harry, "You are not a bad person. You are a very good person who bad things have happened to." That same sentiment applied to the Dumbledore's army. They were not perfect students. They were not even official, but they were good. And that goodness, the choice to learn, to fight, to resist, was what made them powerful. In the years that followed, long after Umbridge left and the castle healed its wounds, the legacy of Dumbledore's army endured. During the final battle of Hogwarts, it was the Dumbledore's army that reassembled. Under Neville's command, they prepared the castle for war. They set traps, they rallied the younger students, they stood, again, at the front lines. Because once you've chosen truth over comfort, you never forget how. Even the Room of Requirement remembered. When Neville returned to it in the last book, it once again transformed, this time into a full resistance base. It provided hammocks, food, warmth. It was a heart that remembered every spell ever whispered inside its walls, a living tribute to a group of students who had once believed they could make a difference, and had. Dumbledore's army was never just about magic. It was a symbol of youth refusing to be silent. It was the story of students stepping into roles adults had failed to fill. It was Hermione's strategy, Ron's loyalty, Luna's belief, Neville's growth, and Harry's heart. It was what made Hogwarts more than a school. It made it a battleground of ideas. And in that battle, the Dumbledore's army was a torch in the darkness. Every era has its silence. Every generation meets its own umbrage. But Dumbledore's army reminds us that resistance does not need permission, that truth does not need approval, that a room, a name, a coin can become a revolution if it is born from courage. And though the films gave us flashes of this, the swirl of spells, the unity in motion, they missed the quiet symbols, the badge in Hermione's pocket, the tremble in Neville's hand as he cast Expelliarmus, the echo of Harry's voice when he said, "We are only as strong as we are united." These are not just moments in a book, they are lessons, not of magic, but of meaning, because in the end, Dumbledore's army was not Dumbledore's at all, it was theirs. Every student who dared to hope, every hand that raised a wand, every heart that refused to surrender, and that in the truest sense is the most powerful magic of all, number 18, more than just training. In the cold corridors of Hogwarts during one of its darkest years, something remarkable was born, not in the spotlight of grand feasts or Quidditch matches, but in the hidden corners of the castle, in the shadows of resistance. The films skimmed the surface, showing Dumbledore's army as a clandestine group practicing spells. Yet the pages of J.K. Rowling's 5th book revealed something deeper, something that pulsed with life, defiance, and purpose. Dumbledore's army, known as the DA, became a heartbeat for those who refused to accept tyranny, a family for those pushed to the margins by fear, and for Harry Potter, a mirror reflecting a power he had never truly grasped before, the ability to inspire others. It began not as a bold rebellion, but as a whisper among friends. Hermione Granger saw what others chose to ignore, that the Ministry of Magic, in its desperate grip on control, was eroding the very soul of Hogwarts. With Dolores Umbridge installed as the new Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher, students were forced into a curriculum devoid of real defense, reduced to reading theory in silence. But what struck the core of many wasn't just the incompetence, it was the intentional stripping of agency. Hermione, understanding the growing danger, proposed the idea of learning outside the system. And that's when the DA was born, not with a bang, but with a quiet resolve in the dingy corners of the Hog's Head. For Harry, who had always been isolated by fame and burden, the DA represented a reversal of roles. For the first time, he wasn't just reacting to chaos, he was leading. In the Room of Requirement, he wasn't the boy who lived, or the lone witness of Voldemort's return. He was a mentor. He was needed. It was he who had shown them how to fight, the book says. He who had given them something worth believing in. For a boy who had been shoved from cupboard to castle, from prophecy to peril, this was an identity not imposed upon him, but one he chose. And the DA was never just about casting spells. Yes, they practiced defensive magic, Expelliarmus, Stupefy, Protego, but those incantations became something more than lessons. They became threads binding the group together. Luna Lovegood, long seen as an oddity, found in the DA a space where her voice mattered. Neville Longbottom, once clumsy and hesitant, grew into courage. In Order of the Phoenix, Rowling writes, Neville had improved beyond all recognition. It wasn't magic that changed him, it was belief. Belief that he wasn't alone, belief that resistance wasn't futile. The Room of Requirement itself seemed to recognize the group's emotional need. It didn't just provide cushions and practice dummies, it gave warmth, space, light. It became a sanctuary, an invisible heartbeat within the walls of Hogwarts. When Harry entered that room, the world outside, the Ministry's lies, Umbridge's punishments, the mounting dread, faded. Inside there was clarity, there was trust. For the members of the DA, it was the only place in the entire wizarding world where truth could be spoken aloud and courage could be kindled without fear. The emotional bond among the members grew stronger with every meeting. Ginny Weasley, younger than most, trained side by side with her peers and proved herself fiercely capable. For her, it wasn't about following Harry, it was about claiming her own place in the fight. "You sort of start thinking anything's possible if you've got enough nerve," she would later say. That nerve was not learned in textbooks or instilled by teachers, it was forged in the quiet revolutions of the DA. Zachariah Smith, often skeptical and critical, served as a reminder that not everyone joined with pure motives, and yet even he showed up, week after week, drawn by something undeniable. The DA wasn't perfect, it was messy, filled with conflicting personalities, doubts and struggles, but that imperfection made it real. It mirrored the complexity of rebellion itself. Not everyone was a born hero, and not all resistance was glamorous. The Ministry's refusal to acknowledge Voldemort's return created an atmosphere of denial so thick it became suffocating. Umbridge embodied that denial, turning Hogwarts into a place of surveillance and fear. She banned groups, punished speech, controlled information, but in doing so she unintentionally fueled the DA. Every restriction was a spark, every decree an invitation to resist. "The Ministry's interference at Hogwarts," Hermione whispered, "is exactly why we need the DA." And so, in the very act of trying to control them, the Ministry empowered them. Cho Chang joined the DA not just out of moral conviction, but out of grief. Cedric Diggory's death haunted her, and Hogwarts, once her sanctuary, had become a place of silence and forgetting. In the DA, she found a way to mourn, to fight, to reclaim her voice. Her kiss with Harry in the Room of Requirement wasn't just romantic, it was a moment where pain met hope, where two people stepped beyond loss and found something worth holding on to. The DA didn't erase trauma, but it gave it meaning. For Ernie Macmillan and Hannah Abbott, the DA was a moral imperative. As Hufflepuffs, they were often overlooked in the narrative of bravery, but they showed up consistently, determined to stand against injustice. In the DA, house rivalries faded. Gryffindors trained alongside Ravenclaws. Slytherins didn't join, but the absence only emphasized the unity that was forming. The DA wasn't about house pride, it was about human decency. And then there was the pain. When the DA was discovered, and Dobby rushed to warn Harry, the group scattered. Yet what remained wasn't defeat. It was a steely resolve. Even after the club's formal end, the lessons endured. When Umbridge punished students with the blood quill, the DA members shared the pain in silence. When Harry was banished from Quidditch, DA members passed messages through enchanted coins, a trick Hermione invented. They adapted, they endured, because this was no longer a club, it was a lifeline. The moment of truth came at the Department of Mysteries. When Harry believed Sirius was in danger, it was the DA that followed him. No questions, no hesitation. "We're coming with you," Neville said. And they did. They faced Death Eaters, they faced real danger, they paid a price. Hermione was cursed, Ron was nearly strangled. Neville broke his nose and kept fighting. "We were all there, we fought too," Luna reminded the Order afterward. "We were there too." Their courage wasn't symbolic, it was tested in fire. That battle scarred them, but it also solidified what the DA truly was. No longer just a student group, they had become a collective voice against authoritarianism, and that voice, once lit, refused to be silenced. By the time the final book begins and Hogwarts falls under Death Eater control, it is the DA, led by Neville, Ginny, and Luna, that carries the torch of resistance. The Room of Requirement becomes a headquarters. The DA becomes the last standing symbol of light within a crumbling world. Neville, who once feared his own shadow, transformed into a leader. "Dumbledore's army still recruiting," he scrawled defiantly on the wall, echoing a memory but also making a promise. He kept the group alive. He gave students food, hope, purpose. The DA became what the Order of the Phoenix had once been. And when the final battle came, it was the DA that opened the castle's gates, that stood alongside the Order, that reminded everyone that age did not determine valor. The emotional impact of the DA is most evident in Harry's own growth. Through teaching others, he learned about himself. In guiding Neville, he saw leadership. In protecting Luna, he discovered loyalty. In watching Ginny fight, he understood love. The DA wasn't just a distraction from pain, it was a forge where his character was reforged. And in that process, he realized that his strength didn't lie in destiny, but in choice. Even the objects of the DA carried symbolic weight. The enchanted coins Hermione crafted became a sign of connection across distance and danger. Years later, those same coins still pulsed with meaning. They weren't just magical tools, they were artifacts of memory, of shared rebellion, of lives once changed. The legacy of the DA outlasted the war. Though Voldemort was defeated, the lessons endured. Hermione, years later, would rise to a position of power, but the roots of her political courage began in that hidden room. Neville would become a professor, not in spite of his DA days, but because of them. Luna would travel the world, forever changed by what she saw in her friends. They were not just survivors. They were builders of a new world. In the eyes of the Ministry, Dumbledore's army had once been a threat. But in truth, it was a model of everything the wizarding world needed: solidarity, bravery, compassion. The DA succeeded where institutions failed. When official voices were silenced, when truth became dangerous, when adults fell prey to politics, it was the youth, the students, the dreamers, the believers who stepped forward. And in that act they became more than students, more than rebels, more than soldiers. They became family, not bound by blood, but by battle, not defined by houses, but by heart. The DA was never just about learning spells, it was about learning how to stand. In the end, they didn't just prepare for war, they created a map for peace. Number 19. Luna Lovegood as a quiet leader. Luna Lovegood walked the halls of Hogwarts as if she floated just above the stones. With her radish earrings, one tucked behind her ear, and the quibbler held like sacred scripture, she seemed to belong to another world entirely. To many students, she was little more than a school oddity. They called her Loony Lovegood behind her back, and sometimes to her face. But Luna never flinched. Her wide, silvery eyes simply blinked in serene acceptance. She had already made peace with being misunderstood. What the students didn't see was the quiet kind of strength that doesn't require raised voices or grand gestures. While others pushed for attention, Luna held her power inward like a steady flame. Her presence in Dumbledore's army wasn't loud, but it was unwavering. She didn't hesitate, she didn't complain. When Harry first gathered the students to fight against Umbridge's oppressive regime, Luna appeared without explanation, simply knowing she belonged there. Unlike others, who joined for revenge, pride, or even thrill, Luna came for truth and justice. She was one of the few who believed Harry without question when he spoke of Voldemort's return. Even Hermione had once doubted. But Luna, with her belief in Nargles and Raxburts, found it easier to believe in painful, invisible truths. Her faith in Harry wasn't blind, was rooted in a kind of intuitive clarity that made her seem more perceptive than others who prided themselves on logic. "You're just as sane as I am," she had once told him with a straight face, and perhaps that was the deepest compliment she could offer. During Dumbledore's army meetings, Luna proved herself more than just an eccentric participant. She listened attentively to every word Harry said. Her spells were precise, her reactions were fast, and most importantly, she never gave in to fear. In the room of requirement, she stood beside students much louder, brasher, and more visibly confident, and yet her magical instincts were among the sharpest. While Zachariah Smith hesitated and even Seamus Finnegan grumbled about the dangers, Luna followed orders with unwavering loyalty. One of the clearest moments of her quiet leadership came during the battle at the Department of Mysteries. Facing adult Death Eaters, the odds were stacked against the group. The other students, Hermione, Ron, Neville, Ginny, all fought with bravery, but they each faltered at moments. Luna, however, moved like someone who accepted that danger was simply part of the world. She dodged curses, fought back with composed spells, and never lost her cool. Even when Hermione was knocked unconscious and Ron was cursed into delirium, Luna kept going. Her voice rang out in the dark halls of the department, clear and deliberate, casting spells with precision. What made Luna's courage even more striking was how little she expected in return. She wasn't doing it for glory or recognition. She wasn't even doing it for friendship in the traditional sense. Luna's empathy was of a rare kind, one that didn't ask for understanding to offer it. When Harry was drowning in grief after Sirius's death, when others gave him space or awkward words, Luna gave him truth. She spoke of her own mother's death not to comfort him, but to show him he wasn't alone. The things we lose have a way of coming back to us in the end, if not always in the way we expect, she told him. That line wasn't just comforting, it was revolutionary. Luna offered perspective when others offered platitudes. She had an uncanny ability to cut through pretense. When the school descended into fear and confusion during the rule of the Carrows in Deathly Hallows, Luna became part of the true resistance. She stayed at Hogwarts. She helped Neville and Ginny maintain what was left of Dumbledore's army, but eventually she was taken. Kidnapped and imprisoned in Malfoy Manor, she endured the cold, the isolation, and the cruelty with grace. When Harry and his friends finally found her, she was thin, pale, and ragged, but her spirit remained whole. She offered Harry gentle support when he faltered, reminding him not only of who he was, but of what they were fighting for. Inside Shell Cottage, where they recovered after escaping Malfoy Manor, Luna continued to serve as a quiet anchor. When everyone was overwhelmed, she remained calm. She reminded others to look up, to breathe, to believe. When Harry was buried in thoughts of Horcruxes and death, Luna looked at the stars, not out of ignorance, but because she saw something in the darkness that others didn't. Her view of the world was never naive. It was just broader than most could grasp. In the Battle of Hogwarts, Luna once again proved her mettle. She fought fiercely. She stood shoulder to shoulder with warriors, never cowering. But perhaps her greatest act of leadership came not in the battlefield, but in the moments of chaos afterward. When Harry stood in the Great Hall after Voldemort's defeat, overwhelmed by the attention, it was Luna who guided him to peace. "Harry," she said softly, "come with me." Then, with characteristic grace, she distracted the crowd so he could slip away and find a moment of stillness. No one else thought to do that. No one else understood how much he needed it. That act, small, silent, and entirely selfless, captures who Luna Lovegood truly is: a protector, an observer, a healer, a leader who doesn't command with orders, but with wisdom. Leadership is often mistaken for loudness, for being at the front, but Luna led by standing still in a world that was always rushing, by being herself in a world that demanded conformity, by believing when belief was considered madness. J.K. Rowling herself gave clues to Luna's special role in the series. In Order of the Phoenix, Luna is often seen as an outsider, yet she is one of the few who can see Thestrals. This ability marks her not as strange, but as someone acquainted with the deepest truths of life and death. Her vision is both literal and symbolic. Where others close their eyes, Luna opens hers wider. She doesn't shy away from pain. She recognizes its shape and greets it like an old friend. Her conversations with Harry are among the most transformative in the series. In the forest after Sirius's death, when even Ron and Hermione can't reach Harry, it's Luna who does. She doesn't press him. She simply sits beside him, talks about her mother, and gently nudges him toward hope. She reminds him that he isn't alone, not really, and that loss doesn't define us. How we carry it does. When Dumbledore dies, Luna doesn't wail, she doesn't scream. She simply places her hand over her heart, and looks to the sky. She's not untouched by grief. She just carries it differently. In a world full of roaring emotions and fiery speeches, Luna is the still pond that reflects the truth. She's also unshakably loyal. When Harry returns to Hogwarts in the final book, Luna is one of the first to respond to the call. She doesn't hesitate. She doesn't ask questions. She shows up, she fights, she believes, and she continues believing, and in the good, in the strange, in the unseen. Years later, she becomes a magizoologist, traveling the world in search of hidden creatures. It's a fitting path. She spends her life looking for things others don't believe in and finding them, just as she found magic in Harry when others only saw a troubled boy, just as she found strength in Neville when he still stumbled through spells, just as she saw goodness in the world even when it was burning. Luna Lovegood is not a supporting character. She is a pillar, a lighthouse, a reminder that leadership isn't always about being heard. Sometimes it's about seeing, really seeing what others miss, and then offering your light, not for applause, but because the darkness needs it. Neville Longbottom once said, "Luna's great. She'll always find a way to believe in you, even if you don't believe in yourself." That's what she gave Harry, what she gave all of them. And it was no small gift. It was the foundation on which true hope was built. In every great movement, there are those whose names are shouted, but there are also those who whisper, who guide, who encourage, who hold the pieces together. Luna Lovegood was one of those, not a general, not a politician, a healer of hearts, a keeper of courage. She was never meant to lead armies. She led souls. Number 20, Umbridge's Hunt for the Room. One of the most thrilling subplots in Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix lies not in grand battles or prophecies, but in the silent war of nerves and strategy between Dolores Umbridge and the students of Hogwarts. In particular, her obsessive hunt for the hidden training ground of Dumbledore's army, the elusive Room of Requirement, became a long psychological duel between oppressive authority and defiant resistance. The movie version glosses over the brilliance of this chase, but the book reveals a far more intricate and relentless investigation filled with enchantments, betrayals, and magical cunning. When Umbridge took control of Hogwarts as the High Inquisitor, she quickly sensed that rebellion was brewing. Harry Potter, whom she sought to discredit, had become a beacon of dissent, and her cruel educational decrees were only fueling the fire. It was not long before she began to suspect that students were meeting in secret. But Hogwarts is an old castle, and its secrets are well protected, especially the Room of Requirement, a magical chamber that only appears to those who know how to ask for it properly. The Room of Requirement is one of the castle's most enigmatic enchantments. It changes shape and purpose depending on the seeker's needs. For the members of Dumbledore's army, it became a fully equipped training ground, complete with dummies, cushions, and even books on defensive spells. But for Umbridge, it remained invisible. The magic was not just in the room's ability to transform. It was in its refusal to be summoned by those with impure intent. As the narration in the book describes, the Room of Requirement would only reveal itself to those who really needed it and knew how to ask. This was the first checkmate in a long game. What made Umbridge particularly dangerous was not her magical prowess, which was rather limited, but her authoritarian mind. She was a bureaucrat, and she believed that any problem could be solved with rules, restrictions, and informants. So she enforced Educational Decree No. 24, banning all student organizations not approved by her office. This was a calculated move. It allowed her to interrogate students, search their bags and dormitories, and take preventive actions, all under the guise of legality. Her first tactics were crude. She organized surprise inspections, particularly targeting groups of students who were close to Harry. She had Argus Filch search common rooms and install more invasive security measures. But Hogwarts resisted her, almost as if the very walls were loyal to Dumbledore. Peeves caused more chaos than usual, and even the staircases seemed to shift at inconvenient moments when Umbridge was pursuing a lead. The school was alive, and it disliked her. Unable to break through the castle's natural defenses, she began recruiting students as spies. These became the Inquisitorial Squad, Slytherins like Draco Malfoy, Pansy Parkinson and Warrington, all given free rein to deduct house points and report on their fellow students. The squad roamed the corridors, ambushed suspected rebels, and taunted students from other houses. They were loathed, but they were effective, and yet even with their expanded reach, they found no sign of a secret meeting place. This was not for lack of trying. The room of requirement, hidden behind a stretch of blank wall on the 7th floor opposite the tapestry of Barnabas the Barmy, remained undetectable. As Neville Longbottom once noted, it's not like we tell it to be a place to practice defense against the dark arts. It just sort of knows. That intuitive aspect of the room was its true strength. It sensed need, not command. Still, Umbridge was relentless. She began experimenting with magical surveillance. She placed secrecy sensors throughout the corridors, devices that glowed or buzzed when detecting hidden plans or illicit activity. But the room of requirement was smarter. Its protective enchantments seemed to cancel out any trace of the DA's presence. The sensors remained silent whenever the room was in use. In one instance, the students exited the room to find one of the sensors placed directly across from the entrance, and yet it had not sounded. Next, she tried tracking the students themselves. Harry, Ron, and Hermione noticed that some students were being followed. Even the library became a place of tension. Every conversation could be overheard, every borrowed book noted. Umbridge even enlisted the portraits on the walls to keep watch, but the magical inhabitants of Hogwarts had their own loyalties. Many of the portraits refused to cooperate. Some even pretended to sleep or conveniently wandered off during critical moments. Then came the psychological warfare. She detained students for questioning, most notably Cho Chang, in an attempt to break their resolve. She used Veritaserum, a powerful truth serum, though it had its limits. As Snape later admitted to Harry, "You used it all up on the last one, didn't you?" The students remained tight-lipped, bonded by fear, but also by conviction. They knew what was at stake. For many, this was not just about learning spells. It was about taking back control from tyranny. The longer the DA remained hidden, the more furious Umbridge became. Her sense of infallibility was being chipped away. She began to lose patience and resorted to setting magical traps near areas she suspected were connected to the DA. One such trap involved cursed parchments that would burn when touched by a student listed as suspicious. Another involved a proximity charm near the 7th floor corridor designed to detect clusters of students lingering there. But the DA had become nimble. They came and went in staggered groups, learned to blend with other students, and never carried written materials that could be traced. And then, one day, the room of requirement fought back in a most poetic way. As the students exited after a particularly intense training session, the entrance corridor filled with mist, not from a spell cast by any student, but seemingly as a diversion orchestrated by the room itself. It disoriented a group of inquisitorial squad members who had been lurking nearby. By the time they cleared their eyes, the corridor was empty. The room had not only concealed itself, it had actively protected its occupants. But magic has its limits. No spell is absolute, and no secrecy eternal. The room of requirement could protect its entrance, but it could not prevent betrayal. It was not through brute force or clever enchantment that Umbridge finally found her way in. It was through treachery. Marietta Edgecombe, Cho's friend and a member of the DA, cracked under pressure. Pressured by her mother, who worked at the Ministry of Magic, she revealed the group's existence to Umbridge. Her face erupted in painful pustules as a result of the jinx Hermione had placed on the parchment, where members had signed their names, a punishment meant for traitors. With Marietta's testimony, Umbridge struck. She stormed the corridor with Filch and members of the inquisitorial squad, and the room of requirement, sensing the knowledge of its location had been breached, opened. What followed was the infamous raid that ended with Dumbledore taking responsibility for the group and fleeing the school to avoid arrest. In one swift move, Umbridge dismantled the heart of the resistance, or so she thought. The truth is, even with the room compromised, the spirit of the DA endured. The students had experienced something deeper than magic. They had shared trust, growth, and the thrill of unity. The Room of Requirement had given them a sanctuary, but it was the bonds forged within that sanctuary that remained. Umbridge, for all her schemes, never understood that. Her victory was temporary, and it was hollow. In hindsight, this hunt, spanning chapters and months, revealed more than just the nature of the room. It showcased the resilience of youth, the cunning of magic, and the tragic reality that even the most powerful enchantments are not immune to human weakness. The Room of Requirement was not defeated by spells, but by fear and betrayal, yet even in that it stood tall for as long as it could, shielding those who needed it most. Hogwarts itself seemed to grieve the loss. After the room was discovered, the air in the corridors grew heavier. The students walked with lowered gazes, and silence fell like a curtain over common rooms and corridors. The dream had ended, but the memory lingered. The room was empty, but the fire it sparked still burned in every student who had raised a wand in defiance. J.K. Rowling captures this entire arc with quiet brilliance. In the book, the tension of this magical cat-and-mouse game builds over pages and chapters, making the reader feel every step of Umbridge's tightening grip and every heartbeat of the DA's hidden triumphs. It is a reminder that some battles are fought not with spells and swords, but with secrets, trust, and courage behind closed doors. That long game of hide-and-seek, of enchanted surveillance and rebellious ingenuity, is one of the most understated yet profound stories in the entire series. It reveals how a room with no name could become the heartbeat of resistance, and how a tyrant, blind to the true nature of magic, could be thwarted by a blank wall that knew how to disappear when it mattered most. Number 21. Sirius Black's Influence. In the hidden corners of the Hogwarts Rebellion, among whispered plans and secret lessons, lies a rarely explored truth, the quiet but powerful influence of Sirius Black on the creation of Dumbledore's army. Though Sirius never set foot in those secret meetings behind the Room of Requirement's walls, his spirit, his encouragement, his belief was very much there. Harry Potter did not step into leadership alone. He stepped forward with a fire lit by someone who saw in him not just a student or godson, but the spark of resistance. Sirius Black, forever shackled by the past and the bars of number 12 Grimmauld Place, lived a half-life. A fugitive who could not walk freely in the world he once fought for. But it was from this prison that he managed to shape one of the most pivotal student movements Hogwarts had ever seen. It began subtly, in the margins of conversations and the weight of his glances. It began in the way he spoke of Harry's father, James Potter, not merely as a memory, but as a symbol of courage and rebellion. Harry, like all 15-year-olds, was searching for meaning, especially in the wake of Cedric Diggory's death and the return of Lord Voldemort, a truth the world refused to face. The Ministry denied it. The Prophet ridiculed him. Even at Hogwarts, where the truth should have been protected, he was cast as a liar. But Sirius never doubted. In him, Harry found an adult who didn't question his sanity, his courage, or his decisions. Sirius saw James in Harry not just in the mess of his hair or the way he held a broomstick, but in his defiance, in his raw sense of justice. In Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, Sirius became a mirror reflecting what Harry needed most: belief. When Hermione suggested creating a secret group to practice defense against the dark arts, Harry's doubts were immediate. Who was he to teach anyone? He had no official qualifications, no authority. But it was Sirius who fed the courage to push forward. When the trio reported their idea to him via the fire in the Gryffindor common room, Sirius's response wasn't caution, it was pride. "I think it's a brilliant idea," he said, his face glowing with enthusiasm in the flames. There is a subtle but vital moment in the book, a psychological turning point. Harry admits that Sirius is the only adult treating him like an equal, a fellow soldier rather than a child. That validation becomes a quiet roar in Harry's heart. The comparison to James, though occasionally reckless, instilled in him a profound sense of purpose. Sirius was not merely reminiscing, he was charging Harry with a legacy. "You're less like your father than I thought," Sirius said once. The risk would have been what made it fun for James. That line was not a criticism. It was a challenge, an invitation to be bold. Sirius, of course, walked a fine line. He was trapped between wanting to relive his youth through Harry and genuinely trying to nurture the next generation of resistance. It's easy to dismiss his influence as nostalgia-driven, but the deeper truth is that Sirius knew what was coming. He had seen what a slow denial of darkness can do to the wizarding world. He had watched Voldemort rise once before. He knew the signs. Dumbledore's army, in his eyes, was not a childish game. It was the necessary first step. Harry felt this. It's why he never hesitated to lead, even when faced with criticism from others. He wasn't doing it just for himself or even for Dumbledore. He was doing it for Sirius too, for someone who had placed his faith in him not out of obligation, but out of true conviction. This emotional anchor held Harry in place when the rest of the world tried to knock him down. The Room of Requirement's walls never heard Sirius's voice, but they echoed with his intentions. Every time Harry stood at the front of the group, wand in hand, teaching the disarming charm or the Patronus, he was echoing Sirius's belief in him. And when students whispered his name with respect, it was the legacy of Sirius and the Marauders that lived again, not through mischief, but through resistance. What's striking is how the film adaptation dimmed this light. In the movie, Sirius's encouragement is limited to vague lines and fleeting appearances. The richness of his emotional investment in Harry's development as a leader is largely erased. The bond that was so crucial in the book becomes a side note, yet in the pages of Rowling's narrative, it's one of the most important catalysts for the creation of the Dumbledore's army. Sirius, through his conversations, planted seeds of revolution. And more than that, he made Harry believe that even at 15, he was ready. Not because of fame or prophecy, but because someone older and scarred by war saw leadership in him. Someone who had suffered and lost everything still looked at Harry and believed. There's also the matter of identity. Sirius often saw himself in Harry, his anger, his longing for justice, his impatience with inaction. But unlike Sirius's own youthful recklessness, Harry tempered his fire with Hermione's logic and Ron's loyalty. In that sense, Sirius was both a cautionary tale and a motivating force. He gave Harry not only courage but a reason to act wisely. One of the most touching undercurrents of their relationship is how Harry clung to Sirius's approval. After each meeting of the Dumbledore's army, Harry would often think of what Sirius would say. Would he be proud? Would he smile that wild, boyish smile? In a world where the adults were failing to protect the truth, Sirius stood as the one man who expected Harry not just to survive, but to lead. It's important to remember how isolated Harry was that year. Even his friends could not fully grasp the weight he carried, but Sirius could. When he spoke of the early days of the Order of the Phoenix, of how resistance starts with the brave few, Harry listened. "The world isn't split into good people and Death Eaters," Sirius once said. That complexity stayed with Harry as he led students of all houses, breaking the boundaries the school had long upheld. Sirius didn't draw the plans for the Dumbledore's army or organize the meetings, but he lit the torch. His words, threaded with memory and hope, became a private manuscript in Harry's mind. "You are truly your father's son, Harry." Not a statement of biology, but of spirit. A reminder that defiance could be noble. We also cannot overlook the emotional sanctuary Sirius provided. The very fact that Harry could talk to someone who had fought in the First Wizarding War gave him a grounding sense of perspective. The conversations were not simply about strategies or spells, they were about legacy. Sirius wanted Harry to know that standing up wasn't about being fearless, but about having something worth protecting. In one of their last fireside talks, Sirius told him, "You're doing a great job. I'm proud of you." Those words, so casually written in the book, carry the weight of a father's love and a soldier's respect. Harry, who had so little of either in his life, absorbed them like sunlight in winter. And when he returned to Hogwarts, he didn't just return as a student, he returned as someone ready to carry others. Dumbledore may have been the namesake of the army, but Sirius was the reason it had a general, the warmth of belief, the electric encouragement, the willingness to remember a world where students took risks for justice. All of that came from him. His impact cannot be measured by presence but by ignition. Without Sirius, there might have been a discussion. But with him, there was a movement. His death, sudden and brutal, struck Harry not only as a personal loss, but as the loss of the one person who truly saw him as already enough. It made the meetings of Dumbledore's army feel sacred. They were no longer just lessons, they were tribute. Each spell practiced, each wand raised was an act of remembrance, of promise, of continuation. In this way, Sirius Black remains the ghost general of the Dumbledore's army, not haunting its halls but living in the very spirit that guided it. Through his belief in Harry, he ensured that the future of resistance was not just possible, but already burning. Number 22. Students from other houses. When people think of Dumbledore's army, they often imagine a Gryffindor-only rebellion, a passionate cause lit by the fire of the lion-hearted, charging forward into danger with wands raised. And why wouldn't they? The films heavily focus on Harry Potter, Hermione Granger, and Ron Weasley, all Gryffindors, and the Room of Requirement becomes a kind of unofficial Gryffindor headquarters. But this popular image is misleading, for it erases an important truth. Dumbledore's army was never about a single house. It was about Hogwarts, and more importantly, it was about unity, the kind forged not by shared colours on a tie, but by the shared resolve in one's soul. Buried beneath the rush of battles and the dazzle of Patronus charms lies a subtler, more powerful message, that of solidarity between Ravenclaws, Hufflepuffs and Gryffindors. Despite the prejudices that naturally arise in a school that sorts 11-year-olds into houses with stereotypes as banners, some students chose to rise above the divisions. When Dolores Umbridge clamped her tyrannical grip over Hogwarts, Dumbledore's army was not a Gryffindor uprising. It was a school-wide movement, an answer to oppression born from collective courage. Take Terry Boot, for instance. A Ravenclaw, precise in thought and fiercely logical, Terry wasn't the kind to rush into things blindly. He joined Dumbledore's army not for glory or rebellion, but because it made sense. "Well, it's about time someone taught us something," he said pragmatically, when discussing the uselessness of Umbridge's theory-based defense against the dark arts. Boot's mind wasn't stirred by sentiment but by reason, and that made his presence in the DA invaluable. When Harry introduced the disarming charm, Terry grasped it quickly and even corrected others with methodical precision. His Ravenclaw wit wasn't just ornamental, it made the army sharper. Padma Patil, also from Ravenclaw, adds a different shade. Though often remembered as Parvati's quieter twin, Padma's loyalty to the DA marked her as someone willing to take real risks. She could have stood back, content to remain uninvolved, but she didn't. She attended practice sessions regularly, endured the same physical tolls, and stood against Umbridge when it mattered. In Order of the Phoenix, it's noted that Padma Patil had been one of the first to master the shield charm. This wasn't a passive student. This was someone actively preparing to defend her school, her friends, and her right to truth. Then there was Anthony Goldstein. His name might slide past the eye when reading quickly, but his presence in the DA was constant. J.K. Rowling later revealed that he was, in fact, one of the original DA members, and more intriguingly, she named him a future prefect, a Ravenclaw leader. Anthony's role may not have shone with theatrical brilliance, but he contributed a calm steadiness. In training sessions, he helped younger or more hesitant students and often mediated disagreements, especially between Gryffindors and other houses. His role, subtle yet consistent, helped reinforce the DA's sense of unity. It was not enough to practice spells, one had to practice patience too, but it is the inclusion of Hufflepuffs that offers perhaps the most powerful message. In the wizarding world, Hufflepuff is too often misunderstood as the leftovers house, yet their loyalty, perseverance, and sense of justice make them the most quietly dangerous of all. Their strength is in constancy, not in dramatic gestures. Enter Zacharias Smith. Zacharias is admittedly a polarizing figure. He joins Dumbledore's army, but with skepticism. He's described in Order of the Phoenix as the one who kept asking how Harry had survived you-know-who, and his questions were not polite. He was abrasive, often cynical, and even slightly annoying. But he was there. He showed up. Despite his doubts, he stayed. And this matters, because resistance is not only made up of the brave and the bold, it is also built on the backs of those who question, who probe, who aren't immediately swept up in the cause, but still refuse to turn away. Zacharias Smith's presence makes an important point. The DA wasn't an echo chamber. It tolerated dissent. It welcomed those who weren't quite sure. And that makes it stronger. Hufflepuff House, through him and others like Hannah Abbott and Ernie Macmillan, proved itself to be a backbone, not flashy, not loud, but firm and steady. Hannah had the courage to return even after her mother was attacked by Death Eaters. Ernie, though pompous at times, pledged loyalty when it mattered. "If Dumbledore says it's safe, then I'm staying," he declared during the Battle of Hogwarts. And this same attitude guided him in the DA. Let us not forget Susan Bones, another Hufflepuff who trained under Harry's guidance. Her family had been targeted by Death Eaters, and she knew the stakes. She didn't need convincing. She knew why it mattered. Her spells were focused and strong. She practiced with the awareness that some of her family might not live to see peace again. And that gave her training a gravity few others carried. In Order of the Phoenix, J.K. Rowling writes, it was not only Gryffindors who arrived in the Room of Requirement. That single line, quiet in its placement, tells a deeper story. One of secret pacts, past notes, nervous glances. Students from houses long kept apart by rivalry or suspicion walking together side by side, choosing to stand beneath the same banner. Not because they had to, but because they chose to. It is true that the DA was initiated by Gryffindors, Hermione specifically, but she opened the doors to everyone. She posted the list in the Gryffindor common room, but spread whispers beyond it. The final DA list includes at least 6 Hufflepuffs and 4 Ravenclaws. For a club that met in secret under threat of expulsion or worse, that level of participation was extraordinary. The Room of Requirement itself became a symbol of inclusivity. It responded not to Gryffindor needs, but to the collective desire to fight back, to learn, to be prepared. Students from different houses, different years, stood shoulder to shoulder, casting stunning spells and shield charms, practicing Patronuses not just for themselves, but for each other. No house banner hung on those walls. There was no house cup, no inter-house competition. There was only unity, necessity, and trust. One of the most striking images often overlooked is when Luna Lovegood, a Ravenclaw, becomes one of the most devoted DA members. Luna, with her unshakable calm and ethereal wisdom, never fit the mold of a traditional revolutionary, and yet she stayed. She learned, she fought, she carried the memory of the DA when others forgot. "The DA's not over," she tells Harry in Half-Blood Prince. "It's just dormant." Luna's presence is the poetic proof that the DA wasn't a faction. It was a family. Even during the final battle, Dumbledore's army returned, not just Gryffindors, but students from all houses who had trained together in secret. Ernie Macmillan was there. Hannah Abbott was there. Terry Boot fought. Padma Patil returned. It wasn't about which house had the most fighters. It was about who had the heart to fight. And they all did. The films, unfortunately, blur these details. The camera favors the trio. The script gives fewer lines to those outside Gryffindor. And in the cinematic memory, Dumbledore's army becomes a red and gold endeavor. But the books, the true source, paint a different picture, one much richer in diversity. The solidarity of houses is there, if one reads closely enough. It lives in the margins, in the names that appear again and again, quietly, bravely, faithfully. This rewriting of history in the visual medium does a disservice to the very message the DA was built on, that unity is not uniformity, that resistance can be messy, complicated, even argumentative, but still real, that people who disagree can still fight for the same truth. Terry's logic, Padma's precision, Anthony's calm, Zacharias' doubt, Hannah's quiet strength, Ernie's bluster, Susan's sorrow, all of these were ingredients in the same potion. They were the reason the DA worked, not just Harry's leadership, not just Hermione's planning, but the trust of those who followed, questioned, practiced, and came back again. Dumbledore's army was more than a student group. It was a living expression of Hogwarts' true purpose, to educate young witches and wizards not just in spells but in strength, in loyalty, in resistance to tyranny. And that education transcended house lines. The members from Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff weren't side characters. They were vital threads in the tapestry of resistance. Without them, there would have been no DA, and perhaps no Hogwarts left to save. In one of the final chapters of Deathly Hallows, Neville Longbottom, now a leader himself, reminds everyone, "We've kept it going, the DA." But he wasn't alone. He was joined by Luna, by Ernie, by others who had trained in the Room of Requirement years earlier. The DA wasn't a passing rebellion, it was a legacy. One born from unity, kept alive by those who remembered. So next time someone says, Dumbledore's army was just a Gryffindor thing, remember the quiet ones, the clever ones, the doubtful ones, and the determined ones. Remember the Ravenclaws who mastered the shield charm before anyone else. Remember the Hufflepuffs who stood their ground when others fled. Remember that Hogwarts, in its darkest hour, was saved not by a single house, but by students from every corner of its ancient stone halls. Because resistance, real resistance, is never about where you're sorted, it's about what you stand for. And in Dumbledore's army, they stood together. Number 23, Hermione as the strategist. In the shadowed corridors of Hogwarts during the 5th year of Harry Potter's education, a quiet revolution took root. The films offered a simplified picture of this resistance, a group of students secretly training to defend themselves against the dark arts. Yet buried within the pages of Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix lies a less celebrated truth. The intellectual architecture of this resistance belonged not to Harry, but to Hermione Granger. The public face of Dumbledore's army, DA, may have been the boy who lived, but its spine, structure, and sustained success emerged from Hermione's methodical brilliance. She was not merely a bright student, she was the strategist, the planner, the guardian of their rebellion. Hermione's first strategic move was not simply to suggest they practice defense, it was her idea to transform scattered frustration into structured resistance. When the Ministry of Magic, through Dolores Umbridge, began dismantling real education in favor of propaganda, students were left vulnerable. Many felt this was unjust, but it was Hermione who turned those emotions into action. She initiated the first meeting at the Hog's Head, ensuring the environment was discreet. I think it's a perfect place," she said in the book, weighing the risk of being overheard and calculating how few people visited the dingy bar. The location was no accident. It was selected for its obscurity and safety. Only Hermione would think of leveraging the pub's low popularity as a strategic advantage. But more telling than her choice of venue was her handling of information. Hermione knew that any organization designed to resist Umbridge's oppressive rule had to be built with caution. She drafted a sign-up sheet for those interested in learning defense against the dark arts. But this was no ordinary parchment. Hermione enchanted the list with a binding magical contract. Each person who signed it unwittingly agreed to be held accountable if they betrayed the group. It wasn't just a clever twist, it was a preemptive strike against the possibility of spies. As the book explains, she had put a jinx on the piece of parchment that made up the sign-up list for the DA. Anyone who betrayed the group would suffer the consequences. When Marietta Edgecombe eventually betrayed the group to Umbridge, it was Hermione's spell that caused boils spelling sneak to erupt across her face. This was no spontaneous punishment, it was planned from the beginning. Hermione had accounted for human weakness. Her strategic thinking extended beyond defensive mechanisms. She constructed a communication system, the Enchanted Galleons, which served as an internal network. The idea was elegantly simple, yet magical in its foresight. Each member of the DA received a fake coin that displayed the date and time of the next meeting. The numbers on the edge would shift according to the information Harry input into his own coin. Hermione had mirrored the concept from the dark mark used by Death Eaters, proving that even the darkest tactics could be repurposed for noble causes. "You know the way Voldemort uses the dark mark to summon his Death Eaters," she said. "Well, we could use a fake galleon." Her calm, clinical repurposing of enemy methods into tools of resistance showed a level of psychological detachment essential for true strategy. The Room of Requirement, their chosen headquarters, is often attributed to Dobby in the films, but it was Dobby who merely reminded them of a room Harry had once used. It was Hermione, however, who theorized its nature, researched its capabilities, and promoted its use as a base of operations. She understood how magic could be manipulated to suit the needs of secrecy. The Room of Requirement was ideal not just because it was hidden, but because it wanted to help. Hermione's deep understanding of magical theory allowed her to trust the room's adaptive security. No one could enter unless they knew exactly what to look for. It was a naturally enchanted bunker, perfectly suited for rebellion, and she recognized its potential instantly. Under pressure, she maintained vigilance. As DA meetings continued, Umbridge's power grew, tensions rose. It would have been easy to grow careless, but Hermione constantly urged caution. She monitored member behavior, reminded them not to speak openly, and made sure the group avoided becoming a rumor. She made strategic decisions based on psychological profiles. For instance, she was wary of including Zachariah Smith, who always seemed skeptical and negative. His inclusion was carefully weighed. Hermione understood the power of morale within an insurrection. "We don't want people who are just going to put everyone else off," she warned. She wasn't just choosing students, she was assembling a unit. Her calculated approach became most apparent after the group was betrayed. When Umbridge discovered the DA's existence and raided the Room of Requirement, it could have meant complete collapse. But Hermione had prepared. She had ensured no physical evidence tied the group to any specific wrongdoing, save Marietta's disfigured face, which served as both retribution and warning. Even during the interrogation, Hermione remained calm, resisting panic. She manipulated the narrative. When caught by Umbridge later that year, Hermione tricked her into entering the Forbidden Forest by pretending she was hiding a weapon for Dumbledore. Umbridge, blinded by her own arrogance, followed. Hermione led her into the arms of the centaurs. It was a cruel gambit, but effective. Hermione had weaponized Umbridge's ignorance. What many overlook is that Hermione's insistence on structure kept the DA alive long enough to matter. Without her, it might have disbanded after a few weeks. It was she who kept the group from devolving into chaos. She created systems, communication, security, accountability, and she thought 3 moves ahead. That level of planning is not the work of a mere clever student. It is the mark of a military strategist. Even her emotional restraint played a role. When Ron or Harry grew heated, she kept to facts. This wasn't coldness, it was discipline. Hermione was prepared to bear the emotional cost of leadership. When Marietta's betrayal was discovered, she showed no glee. It was simply part of the plan. The Boyles were not punishment for revenge, they were a deterrent for the future. She understood what many leaders fail to grasp. Deterrence is more powerful than retaliation. Hermione also understood the importance of symbolic acts. Naming the group Dumbledore's Army wasn't simply a tribute, it was a strategic provocation. By invoking the name of Albus Dumbledore, she directly challenged the Ministry's authority. It sent a message. This was not a student club, it was a political movement. The name alone forced the Ministry to react, drawing attention away from the real workings of the group. While they chased Dumbledore, the students trained in secret. Misdirection, symbolism, and public perception. Hermione employed them all. She also believed in adapting leadership. Though she laid the foundation, Hermione didn't try to control everything. She made Harry the instructor, not because she doubted her own knowledge, but because she recognized influence. Harry had credibility the others respected. She leveraged his status, making him the face while she worked the mechanisms behind the curtain. That's strategic humility. She knew when not to lead, and that perhaps is her greatest strength. The DA's success in the Battle of the Department of Mysteries is often seen as a triumph of bravery, but it was also a result of Hermione's training. When they faced Death Eaters, these students, barely 16, did not freeze. They used defensive spells, they formed formations, they communicated. That level of cohesion does not arise by chance. It is the product of training, discipline, and preparation. Hermione had given them the tools. She had prepared them for war. One of the most overlooked moments occurs after Dumbledore is ousted, and Umbridge becomes headmistress. In the chaos that ensued, many students despaired. Yet the DA remained united. They met in secret, continued training, and kept the spirit of resistance alive. That continuity was not due to charisma. It was the result of careful planning. Hermione had created a system that could endure disruption. That is the hallmark of good strategy, survivability. Even in the final year, when Hogwarts was under Snape and the Carrows' control, the echoes of Hermione's planning could still be felt. Neville Longbottom, who once stammered through spells, led the DA in her absence. The training continued, the rebellion endured, and that foundation was laid years earlier in a small room hidden by magic, with Hermione Granger scripting the blueprint. The films often reduce her to the smart girl. But the books tell a different story. They reveal a leader who operated with precision, foresight, and subtlety. While Harry was the heart of the DA, Hermione was its brain. She orchestrated a student-led resistance in one of the most oppressive environments imaginable, and she did so without chaos or collapse. That is not luck, that is strategy. Hermione's contributions to the DA were not spontaneous acts of cleverness. They were the product of structured thinking, ethical flexibility, and emotional control. She understood risk, managed people, and protected the movement at all costs. Her legacy is not simply that of a smart witch, it is the legacy of a tactician. To study Dumbledore's army is to study Hermione Granger. Her spells weren't just incantations, they were safeguards. Her plans weren't just ideas, they were lifelines. And when history remembers the resistance that rose from Hogwarts' darkest year, it must remember the girl who built it from the shadows. Number 24, Harry's emotional speech. Of all the overlooked treasures buried within the pages of Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, few moments are as quietly powerful, or as sadly neglected by the film adaptation, as Harry's emotional speech in the Hog's Head. It is not the kind of scene that erupts with spells or crackles with Dumbledore's wisdom. It is quieter, raw. A moment where a boy, bruised by truth and grief, stood before his peers and shed the myth of the chosen one, letting them see the scarred, uncertain boy behind the name. This speech, delivered not in the grandeur of the Great Hall or before the Ministry, but in the dim, dusty shadows of a pub, changed everything. The room was filled with whispers when Harry entered. Students of various houses, some sceptical, others intrigued, had crammed into the Hog's Head following Hermione's vague invitation. Names like Ernie Macmillan, Hannah Abbott, and Susan Bones mingled with Cho Chang, the Patil twins, and a curious Luna Lovegood. Neville Longbottom, wide-eyed but determined, hovered at the edge of the crowd. They all came for the same reason: the growing darkness, the whisper of Voldemort's return, the void left by Dumbledore's silence, and perhaps, most of all, the need to know what really happened. Hermione had spoken first, making her case for practical defense. Ron had offered his support. But the eyes in the room drifted to Harry, as if expecting him to lift his wand and show them what a hero looked like. Instead, he hesitated. The room held its breath. And then Harry did something entirely unexpected. He told them the truth, not the legend, not the story scribbled in the Daily Prophet, the truth. He did not want to be there, and he said so. He felt angry, exposed. The people in the room, he believed, had come not to help, but to gawk. They wanted to hear tales of glory, to be near the boy who survived, as if bravery could be absorbed by proximity. And in that moment of bitterness, something inside Harry cracked, and the truth came pouring out. He told them about Quirrell's turban and the smell of garlic, about a dead man sharing a body with a weak professor, about the mirror of Erist and seeing his parents, about being 11 and standing between Voldemort and the Philosopher's Stone, not because he was brave, but because no one else was there. He told them about the Chamber of Secrets, about Parseltongue, and the fear in the eyes of those who thought him the heir of Slytherin, about finding Ginny's body in the cold stillness of the chamber, about killing the basilisk with a sword too heavy for a 12-year-old hand, and the venom that nearly took his life. He told them about the Triwizard Tournament, not as a glorious adventure, but as a nightmare he never asked for, about watching Cedric die, about touching the cold, white hand of a dead friend, about the return of Voldemort, the graveyard, the pain, and the echoing screams. He told them he was afraid, that he did not always know what he was doing, that he did not want to be a leader, a symbol, or a weapon, that he hated how people looked at his scar instead of his eyes. And it was this honesty that shifted the atmosphere in the room. Not spellwork, not fame, not Dumbledore's influence, just the raw vulnerability of a boy who had seen too much, too young. The speech was not planned, it was not rehearsed. It spilled from him like truth too long bottled up. In the book, J.K. Rowling wrote, "I didn't want anyone to talk to me, I just wanted to be alone. I was angry, I was confused. I felt as though I'd been used. I didn't ask for any of it." These weren't lines of a boy savouring power. They were confessions of one trying not to be crushed by it. There was a moment of silence after Harry finished. Not the awkward kind, but the heavy kind that follows when people feel the world tilt a little. No one applauded. No one cheered. But something had changed. Ernie Macmillan was one of the first to speak. He said simply that if Harry had faced you-know-who and lived more than once, he must know what he was talking about. It was not blind faith, but the beginning of earned respect. Hannah Abbott nodded. Susan Bones, whose aunt worked at the ministry, looked at Harry not as a spectacle, but as someone who might understand her family's danger. Cho Chang, who had already seen too much death that year, didn't smile. But she stayed. That said enough. Even Luna Lovegood, often off in her own world, looked at Harry with a curious kind of clarity. The kind that saw not what he was pretending to be, but what he was trying so hard to hide. And then, as quietly as they had gathered, the students began agreeing. To learn, to fight, to train, not for glory, but because the boy in front of them had reminded them what was at stake, not the death of innocence, but the defense of it. In that back room of the Hog's Head, the first true seeds of Dumbledore's army were planted, not by banners or fanfare, but by empathy. The members weren't inspired by Harry's skill, they were inspired by his truth. For the first time, they didn't see the boy who lived. They saw Harry, just Harry. The irony is sharp. The films, in their pursuit of cinematic power, missed this quiet storm. The scene is replaced with quicker decisions, less introspection. It robs the viewers of understanding why so many would follow him, why loyalty was not commanded but offered. Ron and Hermione saw the shift. Hermione, who had orchestrated the meeting, realized she had underestimated the power of Harry's words. Ron, who had always defended Harry, looked at his friend not as a sidekick might look at a leader, but as a brother would look at someone who had finally opened up. Neville Longbottom's journey started there. In that pub, with the smell of goats and old ale, he heard Harry and found courage. The boy who once melted cauldrons became a soldier, a leader in his own right. But it began not with training, but with truth. When the DA met in the room of requirement, their spells were sharper, not because Harry was a perfect teacher, but because he had first become a trusted one. There was no need for masks in the DA. There was sweat, laughter, frustration, but no pretense. They had already seen their leader bleed, not just in battle, but in soul. It is no small thing for a generation of students to prepare for war in secret. But when the Ministry denied Voldemort's return, it was not Dumbledore's wisdom that galvanized them, it was Harry's truth. That moment in the Hog's Head was the stone dropped in the water. The ripples spread through Hogwarts and beyond. J.K. Rowling did not write Harry as perfect. She wrote him angry, flawed, and real. That is why the speech matters. It was one of the few times he allowed himself to be seen, scars, fear, bitterness, and all. And in that exposure, he he gained more than followers. He gained allies. Years later, when Harry walked to his death in the Forbidden Forest, it was not just bravery that marked him. It was the sum of every honest moment that came before, including that speech, including that night, including that rare human confession in the back of a dingy pub. There is a line, less remembered, but quietly haunting. It wasn't just Cedric. I saw him killed. I watched it happen, and I wasn't fast enough. I couldn't stop it. In that line, Harry did what no adult had done. He acknowledged the cost, not just the danger, the human toll. It is easy to forget that Harry was 15. The world had demanded too much. But that night, by speaking as a boy rather than a hero, he reminded everyone that being human was not a weakness, it was a strength. That honesty could be armor. In the DA's battles to come, in the Department of Mysteries, in the halls of Hogwarts, in the final battle, the echo of that speech rang out. It is why they stood beside him, why they followed, why they believed, because for one fleeting moment, Harry Potter did not ask to be believed. He simply asked to be heard, and they listened. Number 25, Lavender Brown and Affections inside the Dumbledore's army. In the shadowed corners of Hogwarts, while the halls echoed with tension and the castle braced for the storm that was to come, a quiet revolution was taking root. It wasn't just a movement of resistance, it was a space where emotions bloomed, hearts collided, and students found more than spells and counter-curses. Within the walls of the Room of Requirement, Dumbledore's army, often called simply the DA, was more than a group of young wizards training for battle. It was a community, and for some, it was where attachments formed that would shape their final years at Hogwarts. One of the most overlooked names in this delicate web of emotional entanglement is Lavender Brown. She was never the first to leap into danger. Lavender was cautious, even hesitant, when whispers of the DA first reached her. She had always been more inclined to believe what she read in the Daily Prophet, and for much of Harry's 5th year, the newspaper painted him as unhinged. Lavender, like many others, doubted him. "Well, I don't know," she had told Parvati Patil when asked about joining the DA. "It just seems a bit risky, doesn't it?" Her reluctance made her an outsider at first, while others, like Neville Longbottom, who had once been seen as hopeless in defense against the dark arts, threw themselves into the secret meetings with fervor, Lavender lingered at the edge. But slowly her world began to shift. She watched her peers grow stronger. She saw Hermione, whom she had always half admired, half envied, cast spells with precision. She saw Ron, her future romantic interest, stumble, laugh, improve. There was something alluring in the shared purpose they all seemed to find. Eventually, curiosity and a quiet longing for connection outweighed her fear. When Lavender finally stepped through the door into the Room of Requirement, it was more than a political decision. It was an emotional leap. The walls were lined with books, and a crackling fire warmed the corners of the room, Harry would later describe. The atmosphere was less like a classroom and more like a sanctuary. For Lavender, it became a space where her voice was heard, where she wasn't merely the pretty girl with a giggle, but a witch capable of strength. Ron was already a fixture of the DA by then. Often exasperated by spells that didn't work, embarrassed by misfires, but committed in his own awkward way. Lavender noticed. And though she wouldn't admit it, not even to Parvati, her eyes lingered a little longer on him. He was not like the polished Cedric Diggory had been. Ron was clumsy, ordinary, with a streak of dry humour that only surfaced when he thought no one was watching. Lavender watched. J.K. Rowling's books never dwell long on the internal dynamics of Dumbledore's army, but there are flashes, moments that hint at the unspoken relationships brewing beneath the surface. It was weird, really, to see Ron concentrating like that, Lavender wrote in her diary, according to an entry that never made it into the films but was referenced in an early draft of Rowling's notes. He gets so red when he casts a spell, like he's trying to hide something. It was in the DA that Lavender's admiration grew into something more fragile, more personal. While Professor Umbridge tightened her grip on the school, the room of requirement became a realm of freedom. Away from the decrees and threats, Lavender saw her fellow students at their most vulnerable and their most real. She saw how Dean Thomas, usually cool and detached, trembled when practicing the shield charm. She saw how Ginny Weasley laughed uncontrollably when her bat-bogey hex went off by accident. But it was Ron who stayed in her thoughts. There's a certain intimacy in struggle. Those who trained together in the DA weren't just classmates anymore. They were comrades. They saw each other bruised, frustrated, sweating from failed spells. Lavender began to notice how Ron stood closer to Harry when he was nervous, how he bit his lip when he prepared a spell, how his voice cracked ever so slightly when he spoke with confidence he didn't feel. These weren't the things she could have learned from afar. The DA made them visible. In one memorable practice, when Harry demonstrated how to cast the disarming charm with a flick of his wrist and a confident Expelliarmus, Ron volunteered to be the target. He stumbled backward dramatically, nearly toppling a bookshelf. Everyone laughed. Lavender laughed too, perhaps a little too loudly. When their eyes met, there was a flicker of something unspoken. She turned away quickly, cheeks flushed, but it lingered in the air. The war crept closer to Hogwarts, and with it, the lines between friendship and survival began to blur. Lavender became more than a peripheral figure. She trained harder, pushed herself to master spells she had once dismissed. Lavender was actually quite good, Neville noted during one meeting. She's quick, better than I expected. It was not meant as a compliment, but Lavender took it as one. Her relationship with Ron was never forged in the room of requirement. That would come later, during the chaos of sixth year, when they began to date publicly. But the spark, the seed of it, was planted there in the DA, watching him, laughing with him, standing beside him as they practiced the same spell over and over. It shaped her feelings. Ron, for all his stubbornness, remembered that too. Lavender was in the DA, he told Harry once, and she was serious about it. It wasn't just about spells. She wanted to fight. There's a quiet tragedy in how we remember the DA. Most recall the spells, the defiance against Umbridge, the lessons Harry taught. Few remember how it became a place of healing and warmth. Lavender, so often reduced to a comic side character in the films, was a part of that warmth. She brought tea once for everyone. My mum says chamomile calms the nerves, she explained shyly. It wasn't laughed at. They all drank it. Even Hermione, though she barely tolerated lavender, began to soften. In one instance, when Ron nearly singed his robe while casting Incendio, it was Lavender who pulled him back. Careful, Ron, she had said. The way she said it stayed with Hermione, though she never admitted it. Rivalry does not always erase respect. The DA allowed space for these emotions to grow. Respect, admiration, affection. It wasn't just Lavender. Susan Bones developed a quiet crush on Ernie Macmillan. Hannah Abbott grew closer to Neville. The books never fully detail these connections, but Rowling herself later confirmed in interviews that not every story was told. In her private notes, she wrote that Dumbledore's army was a crucible of adolescent energy, romantic and otherwise. Lavender's story became more tragic in the final battle. During the siege of Hogwarts, she fought. She stood beside those same students she had once hesitated to join. She cast her spells, raised her wand against Death Eaters, and she was hurt, fatally perhaps, depending on how one reads the scene. Fenrir Greyback attacked her. Her body was curled on the floor, the narration notes, and she was not moving. Some readers believe she died that day, others cling to the hope that she survived. But what matters is that she was there, that she stood with the people she had once only watched from a distance, that her affection for Ron, however fleeting and imperfect, had grown in the warmth of shared resistance. Ron would move on, Hermione would become the center of his life. But somewhere deep in the memories of that room, where spells flew, wands snapped and hearts beat wildly, Lavender's smile remains. Not as a footnote, but as part of the human heart of Dumbledore's army. A reminder that rebellion is not just forged in anger. Sometimes it is shaped by laughter, longing, and the secret glances between young souls learning to hope. The DA was a storm shelter in a collapsing world. Inside its enchanted walls, Lavender found something she hadn't known she needed, a sense of belonging. The soft murmurs between training, the shared fear before a duel, the comfort of knowing someone had your back. It changed her, changed all of them. Years later, when survivors remembered those nights, they wouldn't just talk about the magic. They'd recall the way they leaned on one another, how Luna read outlandish stories from the Quibbler to lighten the mood, how Seamus cracked jokes until tears streamed down their faces, how Lavender's hand brushed Ron's during practice, and neither of them moved it away. Harry himself once said, "We were just kids, but we knew what we were doing mattered." It mattered because it was defiance. It mattered because it was unity. But most of all, it mattered because it made them feel alive, even when death hovered outside the castle walls. Lavender Brown, the hesitant believer turned fierce friend, is not a major character in the grand arc of the books. But within the DA, her story is one of the purest. It's a story of quiet courage, unspoken affection, and the search for connection in a time of chaos. And it began the moment she stepped into the room of requirement, took a deep breath, and picked up her wand, not just to fight the darkness outside, but the uncertainty inside her own heart. Number 26. Why Dumbledore Stayed Silent. Throughout Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, an unsettling distance lingers between Harry and Albus Dumbledore. For the first time, the headmaster avoids his gaze. Conversations are brief or absent altogether. This shift unsettles Harry deeply, exacerbated by his emotional turbulence, grief over Cedric Diggory's death, and the scorn he faces from the wizarding world. The film adaptation captures this tension with silence and visual distance, but leaves the audience with an ambiguous interpretation. Why does Dumbledore withdraw? Why does he remain silent even as Harry forms Dumbledore's army, seemingly without the headmaster's knowledge or approval? This perceived abandonment is not accidental. It is not the failure of an old man unwilling to help a boy in need. Rather, it is a calculated and painful act of self-sacrifice. Dumbledore's silence is his protection, a shield forged from love and necessity, placed between Harry and the growing shadow of Lord Voldemort. Few realize that this is one of Dumbledore's most tragic and heroic decisions, rarely discussed and scarcely understood, even by Harry himself. By the beginning of the fifth book, Voldemort has returned in corporeal form. His strength grows quietly in the shadows, while the Ministry of Magic remains obstinate in denial. Yet the true danger lies in the bond that has begun to form between Harry and Voldemort, a psychic connection that Dumbledore, more than anyone, perceives and fears. He does not share this knowledge with Harry. Instead, he steps back, knowing that any affection, any communication, could draw Voldemort's eye directly onto the boy. Dumbledore senses that Voldemort is not merely alive, but lurking at the edges of Harry's mind. In the Order of the Phoenix, he explains this with agonizing clarity. "I cared about you too much. I cared more for your happiness than your knowing the truth, more for your peace of mind than my plan, more for your life than the lives that might be lost if the plan failed." This confession arrives far too late for Harry to understand during the year he needed it most. When Harry found himself isolated at Privet Drive, his only contact from the wizarding world being a few cryptic letters, he could not have imagined that this too was intentional. Dumbledore had instructed others not to inform him of the Order's plans. Harry saw it as abandonment. In truth, it was the first step in a painful but necessary detachment. Any attention Dumbledore gave to Harry would increase the risk of Voldemort peering through the connection they shared, a connection not fully understood even by the headmaster at that point, but feared with reason. During the meetings of Dumbledore's army, Harry took on the mantle of leadership without ever receiving confirmation or encouragement from the man whose name they bore. This, too, was no accident. Dumbledore allowed the group to form but never acknowledged its existence openly. He would not endanger Harry by linking himself too closely to their actions, nor could he reveal his knowledge without tipping off Umbridge or the Ministry. Instead, he let the movement grow organically as a manifestation of Harry's defiance and leadership. Ironically, Dumbledore's army, the name, the loyalty, the purpose, embodied everything Dumbledore believed in. Yet he remained an absent figurehead, letting the students believe the initiative was their own. Hermione Granger spearheaded the idea, Luna Lovegood contributed creativity, Neville Longbottom discovered courage, and Harry, though uncertain, became the teacher they needed. But through it all, he wondered, why isn't Dumbledore helping me? That unanswered question gnawed at his sense of belonging and trust. The choice to withdraw from Harry was more than strategic. It was devastating for Dumbledore personally. He had mentored the boy for 4 years, watching him grow not only in skill, but in moral integrity. For Dumbledore to turn away now felt like betrayal. But the alternative was worse. Had he drawn closer, spoken to Harry, confided in him, or even looked into his eyes, Voldemort might have sensed that bond and exploited it. The moment your scar hurt so badly that you collapsed at the hearing, I knew he had entered your mind more deeply than ever before, Dumbledore later admitted. And so, he remained cold and silent, cloaking his love beneath layers of detachment. The situation became all the more tragic when Harry began to internalize the silence as rejection. He felt unwanted at the Order's headquarters, out of place at Grimmauld Place, and uncertain of his own worth. His isolation bred frustration, which exploded in moments of rage, especially during his detentions with Umbridge. The absence of Dumbledore, his mentor, his guide, left a vacuum that no one else could fill. Sirius tried, but he carried too much emotional damage of his own. Remus Lupin offered compassion, but his presence was inconsistent. Even Mrs. Weasley's maternal warmth could not replace the wisdom and guidance Harry so desperately craved. In December, when Arthur Weasley was attacked by Nagini, it was Harry who experienced the event through Voldemort's eyes. For a moment, he felt he was the snake. This terrifying incident confirmed Dumbledore's worst fears. The connection had deepened to dangerous levels. In the pensive scene where Dumbledore finally explains his absence, he reveals that he could not risk Voldemort discovering their plans through Harry. I guessed that if I became too close to you, he would use it to get to you, he said. He would exploit the connection. This fear was not unfounded. In the climax of the book, Voldemort possesses Harry's mind inside the Ministry of Magic. It is a moment of unimaginable agony, and for a brief second, Harry feels his own identity dissolve beneath the weight of Voldemort's will. Only the memory of Sirius, Ron, Hermione, and the love he feels for them brings him back. It is a harrowing demonstration of the danger Dumbledore had sought to prevent all along. One of the most tragic consequences of this silence is that Harry believed he was alone in his fight. He questioned his sanity. He feared he was becoming Voldemort. And yet Dumbledore could not reassure him, could not speak to him, could not comfort him, not without risking everything. It was an act of love defined by absence. The invisibility of Dumbledore's hand during this period is one of the most brilliant and heartbreaking aspects of Rowling's storytelling. The headmaster is present, always working behind the scenes, sending orders through members of the Order, coordinating efforts, protecting Harry in secret. But to the boy who had come to rely on him, he might as well have vanished. Even at Hogwarts, Dumbledore kept his distance. He avoided eye contact. He dismissed Harry curtly. The boy interpreted this as rejection, even as resentment. But the truth was far more complex. The pain Dumbledore felt at turning away from Harry was evident in his admission in the final chapters. "I was afraid," he said, "not of Voldemort, but of caring too much." The silence also served to mature Harry. Without Dumbledore's guidance, he had to take initiative. He had to become a leader. Dumbledore's army was born out of necessity, but it shaped Harry into someone others could follow. It tested his character. It prepared him for the battles ahead, and it taught him, in a cruel and unspoken way that leadership sometimes means carrying the burden of uncertainty alone. Yet this lesson came at a cost. The trust between Harry and Dumbledore was frayed, almost broken, by the end of the 5th year. Only when the truth was laid bare, when Dumbledore finally explained his silence, did Harry begin to understand. But even then the wounds remained. Dumbledore's strategy had worked, but it had left scars that would take time to heal. One of the most poignant symbols of this distance is Fawkes, Dumbledore's phoenix, who appears in moments of great emotional intensity. Fawkes does not come to Harry during the 5th year, not until the aftermath of the battle in the Department of Mysteries. The absence of the phoenix, like the absence of the headmaster, is felt deeply. When Fawkes finally sings over the grief-stricken group after Sirius's death, it is as though Dumbledore himself is mourning, not only for Sirius, but for the suffering Harry has endured. This entire narrative arc was trimmed down in the film. Dumbledore's emotional struggle, his silent love, his calculated self-exile, all were compressed into brief scenes or lost entirely. The result is a portrayal of Dumbledore that feels cold, even indifferent. But the books reveal a man tormented by love, terrified by his own emotions, and forced to choose between closeness and safety. In many ways, Dumbledore's silence is one of the greatest sacrifices he ever made. Perhaps the most powerful moment comes not in words but in understanding. When Harry learns the truth, he does not lash out. He listens, he forgives. And in that forgiveness, something vital is restored between them. Dumbledore's army may have been born in secrecy, but it was forged in defiance and matured through pain. It stands as a testament not only to Harry's strength, but to Dumbledore's hidden faith in him. Dumbledore once told Harry, "It is our choices, Harry, that show what we truly are, far more than our abilities." His own choice to remain silent, to distance himself, was one of the most difficult he ever made. And yet it was a choice driven by love, cloaked in sorrow and aimed at survival. In the end, Dumbledore did not abandon Harry. He protected him in the only way he could, by staying away. Number 27, Consequences for Dumbledore's Army Members. When the Room of Requirement fell silent and the parchment burned with betrayal, Dumbledore's army ceased to be a secret. What followed is rarely told in the films, smoothed over with the comforting notion that Hogwarts carried on as usual. But the books, more faithful to the pulse of fear and rebellion, tell a different tale, one hidden in the margins of Umbridge's iron rule. After the discovery of Dumbledore's army, each member bore scars that didn't always bleed, but they cut deep nonetheless. It was Marietta Edgecombe, trembling under the pressure of her mother's connection to the ministry, who revealed the truth. The ink had barely dried on her confession before Dolores Umbridge descended like a thundercloud. The infamous proclamation, Educational Decree No. 24, was not the end of her campaign, it was only the beginning. "I will have order," she declared, and with that the hounds were loosed. In the days that followed, the members of the DA were hunted, not in the literal sense, but through schedules, whispers, and paranoia. Hannah Abbott, known for her sensitive nature, reportedly broke down in herbology after receiving a warning letter from the school's disciplinary board. Her only crime? Having been seen once entering the 7th floor corridor with Susan Bones. Susan herself faced different consequences. Her aunt, Amelia Bones, was high up in the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. That did not save Susan from Umbridge's calculated pressure. During a defense against the dark arts lesson, Umbridge coldly asked her, in front of the class, "Would you say your aunt encourages reckless behavior, or is this personal initiative?" Susan's silence was as loud as thunder. Michael Corner, never the most patient of students, was dragged into Umbridge's office after a hallway scuffle. He had defended Ginny Weasley from a Slytherin who mocked her involvement in Dumbledore's little gang. Though the scuffle was brief, it earned Michael 2 weeks of detention. When he emerged, his hands bore the same marks as Harry's once had, thin, red words repeating across his skin. I must not question authority. But perhaps no one suffered as subtly and as painfully as Luna Lovegood. Luna, the eternal outsider, found herself increasingly isolated. Whispers followed her even more than usual, and though she claimed not to notice, even she grew quieter in those cold months. A group of Ravenclaw girls once enchanted her books to shout, "Traitor's daughter," as she opened them in the great hall. She did not report them. Instead, she moved to the end of the table and read in silence. Neville Longbottom faced the most visible transformation. Once considered forgettable, his loyalty to the DA awoke something ferocious in him. He was summoned more than once by Umbridge for questioning. Though she lacked the legal authority to expel him, she resorted to subtler tactics. His wand was mysteriously broken one morning. Professor McGonagall helped him get a new one, but the message was clear: stay in line or suffer. Cho Chang found herself in the most complicated position of all. Her closeness to Marietta Edgecombe brought suspicions from both sides. DA members avoided her in the corridors, and even Harry grew cold. Yet Cho never admitted to knowing about the betrayal beforehand. Still, she faced social exile in Ravenclaw, her housemates calling her the Leak behind her back. She spent long evenings in the library alone, nursing guilt and anger in equal measure. One of the lesser-known stories was that of Justin Finch Fletchley. Coming from a Muggle family, Justin had already faced danger during the Chamber of Secrets incident, and his renewed courage led him straight into the DA. But once discovered, Justin's name was quietly passed to the Ministry's registry of unreliable half-bloods with dangerous associations. His parents were sent a letter suggesting that perhaps a less disruptive school environment might better suit young Justin's needs. He never told anyone, but his grades fell sharply afterward. Padma Patil and her sister Parvati were interrogated separately, a tactic clearly designed to break their unity. Parvati refused to speak, staring blankly at the wall as Umbridge questioned her. Padma, however, tried to outwit the system. She claimed she only attended out of curiosity. For this, she received a warning, but Parvati faced punishment. The sisters stopped sitting together in class, not out of anger, but to reduce suspicion. Ernie Macmillan, always one for rules and order, experienced a slow unravelling. Having believed strongly in the cause, he also believed in the power of justice. When confronted by Umbridge, he tried to argue his rights as a student. He cited Hogwarts bylaws. He spoke of procedural fairness. Umbridge smiled and handed him a month of detention. "You may copy the rulebook, Mr. Macmillan," she said. "By hand." He filled 3 entire scrolls. It was not just direct punishment. There were smaller things, corrosive and insidious. Library books on defensive spells suddenly went missing. Room assignments were quietly shifted to separate DA members from one another. Professor Flitwick, who knew about the DA but could not openly support it, warned students in coded ways. "Mind your wand work," he once whispered to Terry Boot. Terry never forgot it. Zacharias Smith, though never truly trusted within the group, managed to avoid most punishments by pretending he had been coerced into joining. He wrote an anonymous note to Umbridge declaring that he had only participated under peer pressure. No one could prove it was him. But after the war, when people remembered the DA, Zacharias was never mentioned with pride. Dean Thomas, ever loyal and quiet, kept his head down. He had carved the symbol of the DA into his dormitory bedpost, a small act of defiance that never came to light. But he lived with the fear that it might. Every knock at the door made his heart race. He once told Seamus, "They'll come for us one by one, you'll see." They never did, not quite like that. But the fear lingered. Ginny Weasley, unlike many others, grew only fiercer. She mocked Umbridge to her face, earning multiple detentions. In one, she had to organize files of known student troublemakers, her own name among them. "It's alphabetical," Umbridge said. Ginny responded, "Then I'll know who to recruit next time." The quill dug deep into her hand that night. Colin Creevy's fate is often overlooked. The ever-enthusiastic boy with his camera ever in hand was banned from photographing anything on school grounds. When he was caught with an old picture of the DA, he was sentenced to a week of cleaning trophy cabinets without magic. He returned with bloody knuckles and silence. He stopped bringing his camera to meals after that. Even Lavender Brown, who had joined the DA mostly out of admiration for Parvati and the thrill of rebellion, faced punishment. She was given nightly detentions where she had to feed the school's caged thestrals. It was cold, dark work that left her shaking. She told Ron once, "I see them now. I think that's the point." He didn't know how to respond. The Carrows were not yet in power, but Umbridge had enough cruelty to lay the foundation. She did not need the Cruciatus curse. She had humiliation, isolation, and fear. The DA became a ghost story whispered in hallways, proudly, defiantly, but always quietly. Yet despite it all, no one spoke. Not one of them, even under pressure, named another. That silence was their shield. That silence was their rebellion. When Harry returned for his final battle, many of these same students stood at his side. Neville, Ginny, Luna, Dean, Ernie. They had tasted fear and chose courage, their bond forged in a secret room and tested in a cold castle under the weight of tyranny, held firm. As Dumbledore himself once said, there are all kinds of courage. For the DA, it was the courage not to betray, the courage to endure, and the courage to hope. The consequences they faced were real, lasting, and for many, scarring. But their silence was louder than any confession. And that is the little-known truth of Dumbledore's army. Its real strength was not in spells, but in loyalty.